You think you know Egypt. Sand, pyramids, mummies, tour guides with bad jokes. But what if the desert's silence isn't empty? It's hiding something. Not just tombs and treasure, but questions that bite harder the longer you stare. Why build monuments to the sky with no tools? Why carve tunnels to nowhere? Why does a 4,500-year-old riddle still beat your best algorithm? Welcome to Egypt, the land of gods, geometry, and unsolvable paradoxes, where the dead won't stay quiet, and the living can't agree on what they left behind. Let's start digging. The pyramid problem: how to build the impossible. It's not a question of what they built. It's a question of how the hell they pulled it off with copper chisels, papyrus rope, and vibes. The Great Pyramid of Giza isn't just an ancient wonder, it's a math problem carved into the desert. A 2.3 million block, 6 million ton monument to either divine geometry or an engineering flex so aggressive, it's still mocking us 4,500 years later. And it was done without drones, diesel, or blueprints, just sand, sweat, and something we still haven't found. But here's what you're told to believe. A bunch of guys in linen kilts dragged limestone blocks up ramps, for decades, in perfect straight lines, using tools we haven't even found. Sure. Let's run the math. Each of those limestone blocks? Around 2.5 tons. To finish the pyramid in 20 years, the accepted theory workers would have had to quarry, move, shape, and place a block every 2 minutes, day and night. No breaks, no delays. No crushed feet, just relentless, robotic efficiency, with no modern tools and no wheel. It gets better. The base of the Great Pyramid is almost perfectly level to within less than an inch, across 13 acres, in sand, with no satellite guidance. Today, it would take laser leveling equipment to do that. They used, maybe some string. The alignment of the pyramid to true north is even more precise than the Greenwich Observatory. Let that sink in. Your ancestors were building in the sand with better compass skills than your phone. And what do the ancient texts say about how they did it? Nothing. Not one hieroglyph, not a single dusty instruction manual, just silence, like they didn't think it was worth mentioning, or maybe, like they didn't want anyone to know. How it goes is this. You walk into the desert expecting awe, you leave with a headache. Not because the scale is overwhelming, though it is, but because the logistics refuse to add up. Theories multiply like conspiracy blogs. There's the straight ramp theory, simple, right? Build a massive earthen ramp straight up the side of the pyramid. But that would require more material than the pyramid itself. And what happens when you want to place the top stones? Do you just keep going into the sky? Then there's the zigzagging ramp theory. Cute, except it would have blocked the sides and made fine-tuning the stone placement impossible. The spiral ramp around the inside. Interesting until you realize we've found no trace of it. No ramps, no scaffoldings, no leftover tools, just the stones, sitting there. Mocking your modern arrogance. And then there's the most irritating theory of all. Maybe we're just not smart enough to understand how they did it. That's the one that really gets under the skin of rationalists, because it feels true. The scientists tried to explain it. They brought in structural engineers, stonemasons, archaeologists, even NASA scientists. The results? Mixed, at best. Mark Lehner, Egyptologist and pyramid apologist, insists there's no mystery at all, just a well-organized labor force and brilliant planning. He even helped run an experiment. A small team built a scaled-down pyramid using sleds, ropes, and modern cranes. Small problem, the real pyramid is 60 times larger. Oh, and they used cranes, so not exactly apples to apples. Some engineers suggested that water might have been used to reduce friction in dragging the blocks. Others proposed a lost branch of the Nile helped move the stones closer. Both are helpful, but neither explains the placement, the precision, The clean 51-degree slope maintained across all four sides, with deviations measured in fractions of a degree. What we're left with is a graveyard of half-baked solutions, and a giant pile of stones that laughs in your face. They still can't explain it because either we're missing a technology they had, or they were missing something we have: ego. Modern builders brag. Ancient Egyptians buried their secrets. You don't see manuals or scribes explaining the process. You don't even see errors. No trial and error prototypes. No beta pyramids. They just got it right. First try, dead silent. Like it was never about showing off. That's the part that haunts people. Because if you found a perfect pyramid on another planet, you'd assume alien intelligence. But we find one here and assume what? Slave labor and sunshine? Maybe the pyramid wasn't built to be understood. Maybe that was the point. An anti-monument, a riddle carved in stone, mocking the arrogance of every future civilization. And then, just when you think it couldn't get weirder, scientists find a hidden void inside the structure. 2017. Muon tomography reveals a space the size of a jetliner, totally sealed off above the Grand Gallery. No way in, no idea what's inside, no clue why it's there. A sealed chamber in the most studied building in history. You tell me what kind of civilization hides empty rooms in 6 million-ton stone puzzles, and then tells no one? Which brings us to the next question. If the pyramid is a riddle, what about the parts we haven't found yet? Because under that same desert, they've started finding entire cities they didn't know existed. And beneath the Great Pyramid? They found something else. Something buried. The chamber that shouldn't exist. They were scanning for bones. What they found was a void. Not metaphorically, not a poetic void like you feel staring at your bank account, a real, measurable physical absence, a hole in the foundation of the Great Pyramid, one that wasn't supposed to be there. One that no one can explain. Here's how it went down. In 2023, a team of archaeologists armed with ground-penetrating radar were surveying the Western Cemetery beside the Great Pyramid. It was routine, quiet, sand, bones, digital mapping. Nothing exciting. Until the radar pinged something strange. Not above ground. Not in the walls. Beneath the base. Directly under the northeast corner of the Great Pyramid, one of the most exhaustively studied structures on Earth, there appeared to be a chamber, roughly 9 feet wide, buried, sealed, undisturbed. No tunnel leading to it. No historical record of it. No idea why it's there. The team did what any reasonable person would do: published their findings, speculated a little, and then watched as the authorities swiftly shut down the conversation. Why? Because in Egypt, digging near the Great Pyramid is like trying to excavate under the Vatican. It's not just archaeology, it's theology, it's national identity, it's conspiracy gasoline. How it goes is this. You dig in the desert, and the desert digs back. The Great Pyramid has always had secrets. The original builders left behind no blueprints, no architectural plans. Not even graffiti except a few scrawled work team names deep inside the structure, like Friends of Khufu or Drunkards of Menkaure. Yes, really. Everything else has been guesswork. And for centuries, explorers and treasure hunters tried to crack it open like a giant stone piñata. Some dynamited their way in. Others just got lost. Napoleon supposedly spent a night alone inside and emerged pale and shaken, refusing to speak of what he saw. Which brings us back to this new chamber. Why wasn't it discovered earlier? Simple. The technology wasn't sensitive enough. Ground-penetrating radar is relatively new in archaeology. Until recently, we didn't know how to look beneath the foundational limestone. Now that we can, we're finding things we weren't meant to. But what is it? No one knows. No one's allowed to excavate. The official explanation is cautious. It's a possible architectural anomaly. Translation: we don't know what it is, and we're not touching it. But if it is a chamber, and if it's deliberate, then we have a serious problem. Because the base of the pyramid was supposedly finished first. Which means this chamber had to be built before the rest of the structure. Which means it's older than the pyramid. Which means we don't know what we're looking at. Scientists tried to explain it. Some theorized it could be a symbolic tomb, a sort of spiritual placeholder. Others speculated it might have been a storage space. One even floated the idea that it could be a weathered natural cavern, despite its perfectly geometric dimensions. None of the theories stuck. Why? Because nothing else in the pyramid is accidental. Every block, every angle, every chamber is aligned with obsessive precision to stars, to seasons, to the Nile. The idea that one chamber just randomly exists beneath the structure is like finding a secret basement in your house you never built. It doesn't happen. Not in Egypt, not here. So why won't they open it? 2 words: historical politics. Excavating a chamber beneath the Great Pyramid would ignite a firestorm not just from preservationists, but from religious groups, government watchdogs, conspiracy theorists, and even rival archaeologists. Because if they open it and find nothing, it deflates the myth. But if they open it and find something, well, that would change history. And there's another theory, the one that whispers from the corners of internet forums and dusty old journals, the one archaeologists won't say out loud but can't quite shake. What if the chamber doesn't belong to Khufu's pyramid at all? What if it predates it? What if Khufu's builders found it and built the pyramid on top of it? Now we're in deep water. Because that suggests a lost civilization, or a different origin, or a knowledge we can't account for. And here's the kicker: similar voids have now been found in other pyramids, hidden corridors, sealed shafts, places no human has entered in thousands of years if ever, all sealed, all silent. It's like the ancients weren't just building tombs, they were hiding things. They still can't explain it because they can't agree on what they're even looking at. Is it a trap, a vault, a ritual space? Or is it a message? Some scholars believe ancient Egypt encoded spiritual knowledge in architecture, that the pyramids were cosmological models, stone maps of the afterlife. If that's true, then this chamber may not be for the living. It may be a gate. But here's the irony. Even if the government approved an excavation, even if the world's best archaeologists got clearance, they still couldn't open it without risking collapse. The pyramid is so precisely balanced that drilling even a single hole risks destabilizing sections of the foundation. So the chamber stays closed, unopened, untouched, waiting. Maybe that's how it's supposed to be. Maybe some doors aren't meant to open. Maybe what's down there doesn't want to be found. And as you stand above it, the sun baking the stone beneath your feet, you can't help but wonder. If they built secret chambers under the pyramid, what did they bury next to it? The big void, Egypt's most perfect empty room. Some rooms hide secrets. Some are the secret. This one isn't on any map, not on the blueprints, not in the ancient texts. No one alive has ever stepped inside it. It has no doors, no hallways, no known purpose. But it's there inside the Great Pyramid, as real as the stones around it, as unknowable as the gods who were supposed to live there. They call it the Big Void. And that name? It's the closest thing to honesty we've had in this whole mess. Discovered in 2017 by the Scan Pyramids Project, a group of international physicists and engineers wielding muon tomography scanners, think cosmic ray X-rays for giant dead triangles, the void was found, hovering above the Grand Gallery, the steep central passageway that leads upward through the pyramid's core. It's not a corridor, it's not a tunnel, it's a massive empty space. Bigger than any room inside the pyramid. Roughly 30 meters long, about the size of a commercial jet, suspended in the stone like a coffin in a concrete tomb. And it's sealed on all sides. How it goes is this. The scientists didn't set out looking for a mystery. They were testing new imaging tech. What they found was so unexpected that they assumed it was a glitch, something misaligned, a false positive. But the data came back the same, again, and again, and again. Cosmic particles don't lie, they pass through air, not stone. And there it was, a chunk of pyramid that acted like it didn't exist, the void. The official response from Egypt's antiquities authorities? A shrug. Maybe it's structural, maybe it's decorative, maybe it's nothing. Except, this isn't a civilization known for wasting space. Ancient Egyptians didn't leave voids just because. Every inch of the pyramid is deliberate. The alignment with Orion's belt, the golden ratio in its dimensions, the astronomical precision. These were people who built in stone what others couldn't do in code. There are no accidents in the King's House of Eternity. And still, here it is. A hole in the most solid structure on Earth. A room no one can reach. A riddle with no question. Scientists tried to explain it. Theories began piling up like sand in a tomb shaft. Was it a pressure relief chamber? A forgotten construction space? An ancient builder's break room? But none of these made sense. The void isn't placed like a structural feature, it's above the grand gallery, not directly over the king's chamber, where pressure dispersal would be logical. It's not shaped like a hallway or staircase, it's too clean, too empty. Some speculated it could be a symbolic chamber, a space created for the pharaoh's soul to ascend, in line with the stars, a spiritual launch pad. Others suggested something darker, a burial vault, hidden to protect against tomb robbers. One Egyptologist even proposed it might contain the true burial of Khufu, that the king's chamber we know is a decoy. But here's the problem, there's no way in. At least, not one we've found. No tunnel connects to it, no shaft, no breach, just air sealed in stone for 4,500 years, completely inaccessible. To open it, you'd need to drill or blast, and that's not an option. The pyramid's structural integrity is so delicate that even microscopic vibrations are monitored. One wrong move, and you trigger a collapse, so for now, the void remains untouched, intact. A secret immune to science. And what if, and we say this with full dramatic gravitas that's on purpose, they still can't explain it because it makes no architectural sense, no functional sense, no religious sense, unless you accept that maybe, just maybe, it's not meant to be understood. Think about it. You build a pyramid the size of a mountain. You align it to celestial objects with mathematical perfection. You design it to withstand millennia. And then, right at the heart of it, you hide a massive chamber and make sure no one can reach it, not even you. Why? It's not a room, it's a statement. A message. Maybe even a threat. The philosopher's version is this. The void exists to remind you that knowledge has limits. That mystery isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. The ancients weren't primitive. They were precise. And if they left a mystery in the stone, it's because they wanted it to stay mysterious. But the darker version is worse. What if it wasn't the Egyptians who built the void? What if they found it and built the pyramid around it? A sacred space. An alien vault. A cosmic blip. We don't know. We can't know. And that makes people crazy. You see, modern science has a terrible weakness. It hates not knowing. It can't leave a blank space on the map. Every unknown must become a known. And here, in the middle of one of the most studied monuments in history, sits a giant, empty middle finger to that instinct. The void laughs in your face. And your tools can't touch it. Your theories bounce off it. Your curiosity feeds it. It is, in short, the perfect mystery. And it leads to a bigger question, maybe the biggest one of all. If the inside of the pyramid has secret chambers, what about the people inside them? The missing queen, Nefertiti's vanishing act. Her name means the beautiful one has come. And then, just as suddenly she left. No war, no scandal, no death mask, no tomb. Just a vanishing. For over a decade, Queen Nefertiti ruled beside Pharaoh Akhenaten in one of the most bizarre periods of Egyptian history, a time of sun gods, closed temples, and radical monotheism. She wasn't just a decorative consort, she was powerful, political, possibly a co-ruler, maybe even a pharaoh herself, under the alias Neferuaten. And then, around 1336 BCE, nothing. No official records of her death, no royal burial, no shrine. Just a black hole in the scroll of time where her legacy should be. How it goes is this. In a civilization obsessed with the afterlife where every noble got a tomb, every cat got a sarcophagus, and even organs were embalmed and labeled, the idea that one of its most iconic queens could simply disappear is more than odd. It's offensive. You're expected to believe that this queen, the face of an entire religious revolution, the woman whose bust is literally the Mona Lisa of the ancient world, just faded away, like sand off a statue. Let's back up. During the Amarna period, Akhenaten and Nefertiti did something that was basically ancient heresy. They banned the worship of Egypt's traditional gods and declared the sun disk, Aten, the one true deity. Polytheism, cancelled, priests, unemployed. The entire theological infrastructure of Egypt, which had lasted for centuries, was torched in favor of minimalist sun worship. And Nefertiti wasn't just standing by. She appears in more carvings than Akhenaten himself. She's shown smiting enemies, wearing pharaonic regalia, even leading religious rituals. This wasn't just a queen, this was a co-god. Then Akhenaten dies. And history hits the mute button. The court tries to pretend none of it happened. The next pharaohs scrub out the Amarna legacy. Temples are buried. Names are chiseled off walls. It's like ancient Egypt did a factory reset. But what happened to Nefertiti? Here's where things get surreal. Some scholars argue she died early and was buried in Amarna, a city now in ruins. But there's no body, no marked tomb, nothing definitive. Others argue she changed her name, became pharaoh, and ruled in disguise. That's where the name Neferuaten comes in, a mysterious figure who ruled briefly after Akhenaten, before the rise of the boy king Tutankhamun. Many believe this was Nefertiti going full Elizabeth Holmes. All titles, no fingerprints. Then there's the Nicholas Reeves theory, and this is where it gets wild. In 2015, Reeves examined high-resolution scans of Tutankhamun's tomb. He noticed faint lines beneath the painted walls, not cracks, outlines, architectural ghosts. They looked suspiciously like doorways that had been plastered over and painted to match the rest of the chamber. He proposed something insane. Nefertiti's tomb is right behind Tutankhamun's. That the boy king's modest burial site was actually just a front. That behind one of the walls lies a sealed chamber, and inside it, Nefertiti. This theory made headlines. It sparked arguments. Egypt's former antiquities chief, Zahi Hawass, dismissed it outright. No tomb, he said, no queen. But he couldn't disprove it. The scans were real. The lines were there. And yet, no one opened the wall. The Egyptian government briefly authorized radar scans, then rescinded, then approved more scans, then declared there was nothing behind the wall, but never released conclusive data. The whole thing turned into an archaeological soap opera. Scientists tried to explain it. Every year, another expedition proposes another explanation. Maybe she was buried in secret, maybe her tomb was robbed, maybe she died in disgrace. Maybe her body is in plain sight, just mislabeled, like an ancient version of misfiling a queen under miscellaneous. In 2003, A team claimed to have found her mummy in the Valley of the Kings, an unidentified woman known as the Younger Lady. DNA testing later confirmed that this mummy was Tutankhamun's mother, and we know Nefertiti was his stepmother. So that theory collapsed. Another body, labeled KV35YL, was once suggested to be her, but again, no definitive ID. Even her famous bust, the one housed in Berlin, is part of the mystery. It's nearly perfect, symmetrical, untouched, but strangely, unfinished. One eye is missing. Not damaged, never painted. Like the artist stopped halfway, like he knew something was wrong. They still can't explain it because too many threads lead to dead ends. Every possibility creates a contradiction. If she was buried in Amarna, where's the tomb? If she ruled after Akhenaten, why is her name erased? If she was buried in Tutankhamun's tomb, why won't they open the wall? There's no smoking sarcophagus, just faint outlines, conflicting DNA, and ancient politics. But maybe that's the point. Maybe Nefertiti didn't vanish. Maybe she erased herself. After all, she lived through a failed religious coup. Her name would have been first on the chopping block during the backlash. What better way to survive spiritually or literally than to become a ghost? No grave, no glory, just silence. Not forgotten, hidden. And maybe that's why the wall hasn't come down. Not because they're afraid of being wrong, but because they're afraid of being right. Because if Nefertiti really is behind that wall, then every textbook gets rewritten, every theory shatters, the line of pharaohs shifts. The story of monotheism has to be told from a different throne, one carved by a woman who vanished so completely, she may have become the ultimate myth. And that begs one last question. If her body is still lost, what else have we buried in plain sight? The Tulli papyrus, fire in the sky. In 1480 BCE, something appeared in the skies over Egypt. It wasn't the sun, it wasn't a star. It wasn't a god, at least not one officially listed in the state religion. It was round. It was burning. And it flew. It hovered over the pharaoh's army, glowed brighter than anything they'd seen, and then, according to the text, it multiplied. Wave after wave of flying circles poured across the Egyptian sky, sending animals into panic, priests into prayer, and the entire military into stunned silence. Then, as suddenly as they had arrived, they left. And all we have left is a single sheet of papyrus, or rather, a transcription of it known as the Tulli papyrus. And it's either a crude forgery, a historical curiosity, or the earliest documented UFO sighting in human history. How it goes is this. In the 1930s, an Egyptian papyrus was reportedly discovered in a Cairo antique shop by a man named Alberto Tulli, director of the Egyptian section of the Vatican Museum. He didn't purchase the papyrus outright, he wasn't allowed, but he supposedly made a copy. Years later, a transcription of this copy surfaced, translated by a certain Boris Derachowiltz, a controversial Egyptologist, and conveniently, also a bit of a mystic. The translated text reads like something from a 1950s sci-fi script accidentally left in a tomb. In the year 22, there appeared in the sky a great disk of fire coming from the south. It had no head. The breath of its mouth emitted a foul odor. Its body 1 rod long and 1 rod wide. It had no voice. And later. Now, after some days had passed, behold, they became more numerous in the sky than ever. They shined in the sky more than the brightness of the sun, and extended to the limits of the 4 supports of the heavens. And finally, it was after supper. Then, these fire circles ascended higher in the sky, moving toward the south. Fishes and birds fell from the sky. We're not saying ancient aliens. But let's say we're not saying ancient aliens. Scientists tried to explain it. And depending on which scientist you ask, you'll get a different version of, it's nothing. The mainstream Egyptological position? The Tulli papyrus is a hoax. Why? Well, for starters, the original is missing. No one has seen the papyrus itself, only the alleged transcription, written in modern hieratic script, which looks suspiciously tidy. There are no museum records, no photos, and no notes from Tulli confirming the find beyond anecdotal letters. When researchers asked the Vatican Museum for verification, they were told the papyrus was not part of the collection. It just doesn't exist, not anymore. Case closed? Not quite. Because the language in the translation, though clunky, does follow the format of New Kingdom military records. And the descriptions, odd as they are consistent with reports of high atmosphere phenomena, brightness, silence, sudden movement, panic in animals. Skeptics suggest it could have been a meteor storm or ball lightning. But here's the problem. Ancient Egyptian scribes weren't stupid. They knew the difference between natural events and omens. They cataloged stars, eclipses, and comets with clinical precision. They had names for all of it. This, they didn't have a name for. They just called it a circle of fire. And let's not forget this sighting happens during the reign of Thutmose III, a military pharaoh known for keeping incredibly detailed annals, the kind of guy who counted his arrows. If this event made it into his official records, it wasn't taken lightly. So maybe it was natural, maybe it was supernatural, maybe it was extra-natural. But if it was a hoax, why fake this? There's no treasure map, no apocalyptic prophecy, no secret knowledge. It's just a weird little sky report. Unless, of course, it was part of something bigger, something buried, something the scribes saw and couldn't unsee. They still can't explain it because they don't agree on what it even is. Without the original document, there's nothing to carbon date, nothing to analyze, just a ghost of a text like a whisper in the wind that may or may not have existed. So it lives in historical limbo. Too strange to be real. Too real to be ignored. Which, of course, makes it the perfect conspiracy seed. Cue the usual suspects. Ancient astronaut theorists say the Tulli papyrus is smoking papyrus proof that Egypt had extraterrestrial contact, that Thutmose III was visited, that the gods of Egypt were never metaphor, they were tech. And maybe that's why the document vanished. Hidden, buried, discredited. Because you can dismiss aliens all day long until you read a royal document from 3,000 years ago that sounds like a scene from Close Encounters. Maybe the scribes wrote it down because they didn't want it to be forgotten. Maybe we keep trying to forget because we don't want it to be real. Or maybe it never happened. And the Tulli papyrus is just that, a forgery, a fantasy, a footnote. But if you've ever stood in the middle of the desert at night, looked up at the same stars those scribes watched, you'll understand why they wrote it down. And why it still haunts us. Because if fire fell from the sky once, what else was watching? The vanished map. Where in the world was Punt? It was a land of incense and ivory, of gold, blackwood, and baboons, of myrrh trees so precious, Egypt's queen ordered them planted in temple courtyards. They called it Punt or Punt if you're feeling royal and theatrical. They called it Ta Netcher, the land of the gods. And then they lost it. Let that sink in. Ancient Egypt, one of the most organized, obsessively recorded civilizations in history, a culture that kept receipts for grain, toothpicks, and toe rings, somehow lost an entire country. No one knows where Punt was. No ruins, no capital, no coastline. Just murals, cargo manifests, and myth. How it goes is this. The Egyptians loved Punt, not just for its trade, though they did import everything short of live unicorns, but for what it represented. A mystical origin point, a place of sacred abundance. A kind of holy Costco stocked with jungle creatures and divine botanicals. Expeditions were dispatched from as early as the 25th century BCE. The most famous one was led by Queen Hatshepsut during the 18th dynasty. She carved the entire trip into the walls of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari like a royal travel blog. You can still see it. Egyptian ships, sleek and ceremonial, sailing off into the unknown. Piles of exotic goods stacked like offerings. A Puntite queen heavy-set, barefoot, regal standing beneath myrrh trees. It's the closest thing we have to a snapshot of the place. But the background? Totally blank. No geographic markers. No coordinates. No, you are here, map. Just the assumption that the reader already knew where Punt was, which, frankly, is rude. Scientists tried to explain it. Theories piled up like cargo on a Nile barge. Some said Punt was in modern-day Eritrea or Somalia, which makes sense, based on the types of goods imported. Frankincense and myrrh come from there, as do the weird African animals that show up in temple art. Others placed it in southern Arabia, arguing that the Red Sea was Egypt's trade freeway, and the descriptions of coastal cities line up better with Yemen. A more recent theory suggests that Punt wasn't a single location at all, but a network of trade hubs scattered across the Horn of Africa and Arabian Peninsula, like a decentralized divine Amazon warehouse. That would explain why we can't find its capital. There wasn't one. Just ports, barter zones, and temporary markets in sacred disguise. But here's where things get shady. Despite all the mentions of Punt, dozens of them across centuries, there's no physical evidence of Egyptian settlement there. No temples, no outposts, no records from Punt's side of the equation. It's a one-way story. The Egyptians wrote about Punt. Punt didn't write back. No language. No script. No archives. Just silence. It's like trading with Atlantis. Which makes some scholars nervous, because that silence, it starts to feel suspiciously like myth, a holy metaphor, a cartographic placeholder for spiritual longing. What if Punt wasn't real? What if it was a ritual name, a catch-all for where the sacred stuff comes from? A branding exercise. God's own supply chain. They still can't explain it because none of the puzzle pieces fit cleanly. If Punt was Somalia, why is there no linguistic crossover? If it was Yemen, how did they transport giraffes across the desert? If it was a network, where are the archaeological breadcrumbs? The trail is ancient, but maddeningly cold. And let's not ignore the other possibility, the one Egyptologists quietly avoid. What if Punt moved? What if it wasn't a place on the map, but a people, a migrating culture? A sacred merchant class, traveling by wind and stars, showing up at Egyptian ports like gods with gift baskets, and then vanishing into legend. Maybe Punt was never meant to be found. Maybe it was sacred because it was always just out of reach. Think about it. You're an ancient Egyptian. You believe the gods walk among you. You believe the Nile is divine. You believe the afterlife is a real address. So when a strange ship arrives, packed with perfumes and panthers and priests who speak in riddles, you don't ask for passports. You call it Punt. You write it in gold. And when it stops coming, you assume the gods have withdrawn. But here's the real kicker. Some archaeologists now think the Egyptians might have faked part of it. That the expedition to Punt was propaganda, that Hatshepsut's temple carvings were part PR stunt, part divine branding. There are subtle inconsistencies in the art: duplicated cargo, strangely generic buildings, gods inserted post facto. If that's true, then maybe Punt was always more dream than destination. A story written in spice. A myth you could sail to but never really arrive. And maybe that's why it still haunts historians. Because we lost more than a trade route. We lost a piece of Egypt's soul. And if Punt can vanish, what else did they lose or erase that we'll never even know existed? The hieroglyph that shouldn't be, time travel at Abydos. You don't expect to see a helicopter in a 3,000-year-old temple. And yet, there it is. Carved into a sandstone beam at the temple of Seti I in Abydos, one of Egypt's oldest and holiest sites, are hieroglyphs that look uncannily like modern machines. A helicopter, a tank, a fighter jet, even what some swear is a flying saucer. Perfectly proportioned, sitting in plain sight. In a temple built around 1290 BCE. Welcome to one of the most controversial and meme-fueled mysteries in Egyptology. The Abydos helicopter hieroglyphs, where time seems to fold like bad origami. How it goes is this. The Temple of Seti I is a masterpiece. Long corridors, shadowy chapels, reliefs so intricate they feel alive. Built during the New Kingdom, it was meant to honor Osiris, god of the dead, and affirm the pharaohs' divine legacy. But it's also a place where dynasties layered their stories. Seti's son Ramses II, one of Egypt's longest reigning pharaohs, continued construction after his father's death, which meant carving over older inscriptions. And that's where things get weird. On a ceiling beam in a back room high above eye level, the overlaid hieroglyphs created accidental shapes, if you squint, or if you look with modern eyes. Or if you're in the mood for some sweet temporal paranoia. The first images appeared in fringe archaeology circles in the 1990s. Then, the internet got involved. Suddenly, the Abydos helicopter was everywhere. Conspiracy theorists pointed to it as proof that ancient Egyptians had advanced technology. They were visited by time travelers, or aliens, or ancient humans with forgotten tech. The walls were talking. And apparently, they spoke Apache. Scientists tried to explain it. And to their credit, they mostly succeeded. The scholarly term for what happened is palimpsest, a rewriting or overcarving of hieroglyphs, where older inscriptions were filled in and new ones carved over the same spot. Over time, the plaster that filled the old glyphs eroded, causing both sets of inscriptions to show simultaneously. It's like writing cat in pen, covering it with whiteout, then writing dog over it in pencil, and then waiting 0 years for erosion to turn the whole thing into a visual Rorschach test for the internet. According to the experts, what looks like a helicopter is actually a layered mess of characters. One reading spells, "He who repulses the 9 bows," a poetic name for Egypt's enemies. The other invokes the name of Ramses II. So case closed, right? Well, not exactly. They still can't explain it because, even with the palimpsest theory, the imagery is too precise. The helicopter has a distinct tail rotor, body, and cockpit-like shape. The submarine or spaceship looks eerily aerodynamic. Even if you accept that it's accidental, it begs a question. Why do our modern machines resemble ancient visual accidents? That's the rabbit hole. That's where the brain starts to itch. Because coincidences are comforting until they pile up. Sure, the carvings weren't meant to depict technology, but what if something older inspired both? A visual archetype, a memory, a shape passed down in myth, ritual, or hallucination. Or maybe the Egyptians did see something in the sky and tried to draw it with the tools they had, which would make the Abydos glyphs not art, but witness testimony. And while scholars roll their eyes, other anomalies in Egyptian art remain stubborn. The Dendera light, which resembles a giant bulb connected to a wire. The stone-cutting precision of obelisks. The supposed batteries found in Baghdad close, but not quite. And of course, the Tulli papyrus, which we already saw, lit the skies with fire circles. What's more likely? That we keep imagining futuristic shapes in ancient art? Or that ancient art recorded something real and we're too committed to our own timelines to believe it? The Abydos helicopter, whether intentional or accidental, becomes a mirror. It reflects what we want it to reflect. Some see coincidence, others see prophecy, the rest just see marketing gold. But no one denies one thing: it shouldn't look the way it looks. And that's the real mystery, not the shape itself but the meaning we attach to it. The refusal to believe our ancestors could know things we haven't yet rediscovered. The panic that comes when a civilization built in stone seems to wink at our most advanced machines. Because what if it's not just coincidence? What if ancient Egypt didn't just worship gods? What if it recorded visitors? The Serapeum of Saqqara, boxes built for giants. Imagine a hallway deep underground. Stone walls, no windows, silence so thick it hums. Now, imagine 24 giant stone boxes sitting in that hallway. Each carved from a single block of black granite. Each weighing upwards of 70 tons with lids that weigh another 30. Each cut with such mechanical precision you could cut your ego on the corners. This is the Serapeum of Saqqara. And it makes no damn sense. Officially, it's a tomb complex for sacred Apis bulls, animals worshipped as physical incarnations of the god Ptah. When a bull died, it got embalmed and entombed with ceremony fit for a pharaoh. But here's the catch. The coffins, if that's what they are absurdly massive. They were carved with such finesse that even modern masons get twitchy looking at them. And somehow, they were transported, lowered, aligned, and placed with zero room for error. Let that sink in. You're lowering a 100-ton coffin lid onto a perfectly carved granite base in a pitch-black tunnel with no cranes, no pulleys, no do-overs. And they did this 24 times. How? No one knows. How it goes is this. The Serapeum was rediscovered in 1850 by French archaeologist Auguste Mariette, who was following ancient accounts from Strabo and Pliny. He noticed a sphinx partially buried in the sand, started digging, and soon unearthed a subterranean maze of crypts and chambers filled with, well, nothing. The boxes were empty. No bulls. No offerings. No mummies. Just dust. Whatever was in them had either been looted or never placed at all. Which is strange, considering the effort it would take to make even one of these sarcophagi. We're not talking cheap labor. We're talking stone mined from Aswan 500 miles away, transported, shaped, and polished to a mirror finish. Why make 24 if you're just going to leave them empty? Or here's a better question. Were they ever meant for bulls at all? Scientists tried to explain it. Mainstream Egyptologists hold the line. This was a sacred burial site for Apis bulls, period. They point to inscriptions crude and inconsistent added during later dynasties. These seem to reference the bulls by name, offering some narrative continuity. But here's where the logic unravels like a bad mummy wrap. The boxes are Old Kingdom precision. The inscriptions? Sloppy, like graffiti carved centuries later. The craftsmanship of the box doesn't match the quality of the writing. It's like someone spray-painted a stick figure on a supercomputer and said, "See, same era." Engineering experts have examined the sarcophagi and marveled, and by marveled, we mean panicked slightly at how perfectly machined the interiors are. The angles, the polish, the symmetry. You'd need diamond-tipped drills and high-speed saws today to replicate it. Some researchers have argued that these boxes were not funerary at all. They might have been resonant chambers built to amplify sound or energy. Others believe they were containment devices for something powerful or dangerous. Still others suggest these were vaults for knowledge now long since removed. But the bulls, there's no physical evidence they were ever in the boxes. And no matter how deep you dig, the mystery just multiplies. Because if the Egyptians had the tools to do this, why haven't we found them? Where are the chisels, the drills, the blueprints? You don't just whip up a 100-ton precision stone box on a hunch. That's not ancient IKEA. That's deliberate, high-skill, industrial engineering. And the Serapeum isn't alone. Similar anomalies pop up all over Egypt: tools we can't find, cuts we can't replicate, and silence we can't interpret. They still can't explain it because if you accept the boxes were cut with ancient tech, you're admitting we've lost something. A method, a science, a tradition that vanished without a trace. If you argue they were made with modern tools somehow, by some rogue civilization or lost race, you open up another door. That Egypt was inheriting technology it didn't understand. A cargo cult of stone. Worshipping relics they couldn't build but knew were sacred. And if the boxes aren't coffins, what were they? Containment devices, star maps, resonant harmonic amplifiers? No theory fits cleanly. Every answer creates 3 new questions. And that's how the Serapeum traps you. Because the longer you stare at those black boxes, the more they start to feel like questions shaped in stone. Not tombs. Warnings. And what they might be warning us about is this. If 24 perfect granite vaults were built for something no one ever found, what else did the Egyptians seal away, and why were they so determined to make sure it stayed closed? The curse of the pharaohs, coincidence, mold, or something worse? The Valley of the Kings. It's dry, it's dead quiet, and under the sun-bleached cliffs, something ancient is waking up. British archaeologist Howard Carter has just cracked open the greatest archaeological find of the century, the tomb of Tutankhamun, a boy king, dead at 18, buried in obscurity, and forgotten for over 3,000 years. Gold glints in the torchlight. Statues, chariots, knives, jewelry, gods, all untouched. It's a pharaoh's Instagram account, frozen in time. But within weeks of the tomb's opening, people start dying. First, Lord Carnarvon, Carter's patron. He dies of blood poisoning from an infected mosquito bite in Cairo in the middle of the night. The lights reportedly go out across the city the moment he dies. Then, a radiologist who x-rayed the mummy. Then, the man who financed the expedition. Then, one of Carter's assistants. Then, a guy who just visited the tomb for an afternoon. Within a few years, over a dozen people with links to the excavation are dead. Coincidence? Maybe. But the press calls it something else, the curse of the pharaohs. How it goes is this. As the tomb was opened, Carter claimed to find a clay tablet warning that death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the king's peace. That quote has never been verified. The tablet was never photographed. Carter never mentioned it again. But the damage was done. Western audiences already intoxicated with spiritualism, seances, and death cult aesthetics latched onto the idea of a mummy's curse like it was dessert. Newspaper headlines exploded. Death comes to tomb raiders. Mummy's curse kills again. Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes and a noted occultist, blamed the deaths on elementals, unleashed by ancient spells. And suddenly, Egypt wasn't just ancient, it was dangerous. Scientists tried to explain it. Immediately, rational minds jumped in to unspook the narrative. One of the most accepted theories? Toxic mold. Tombs sealed for thousands of years could develop lethal fungal spores, Aspergillus flavus, Stachybotrys, or trichoderma, that when disturbed, release toxins causing respiratory failure or infections. Sounds scientific, sounds plausible. But then, you look at the pattern. Carnarvon? Died of an infected mosquito bite. Another victim? Committed suicide. Another? Died in a car crash. None of the deaths shared symptoms. Some happened years apart. Some people who spent more time in the tomb, including Howard Carter himself, lived to ripe old ages. Carter died peacefully at 64, long after the so-called curse had run its course. So if it was a curse, it was wildly inconsistent. Which, frankly, is exactly what a good curse would do. Kill just enough to be feared, not enough to be dismissed. They still can't explain it because No single theory fits all the data. If it was mold, why didn't everyone exposed die? If it was coincidence, why so many high-profile targets? If it was psychological, why were even skeptics unnerved? Maybe the real power of the curse wasn't biochemical. Maybe it was existential. Because here's the thing, no one likes to say out loud. They opened the tomb too well. Tutankhamun's resting place was supposed to be secret. It was hidden under debris from another tomb, buried hastily, unmarked. He wasn't supposed to be found, he was supposed to vanish. And then the modern world barged in with flashbulbs and funding. They unwrapped his body, cut him apart, displayed him. His knife was made from meteorite literally forged from a fallen star. His throne hinted at older gods. His tomb was too small, as if borrowed or reassigned. Everything about the boy king whispered one word. Wrong. And maybe the curse wasn't a spell. Maybe it was a psychic backlash. A cosmic failsafe embedded in myth. A way of warning modern men, some things should stay buried. Think of it like a firewall. Disturb the dead, pay the price. Ignore the symbolism, suffer the consequence. Reduce the sacred to spectacle, and the sacred bites back. Even today, scientists still get squeamish handling ancient remains. Some have quit mid-project, others report nightmares, health issues, strange coincidences. It's not scientific, but it's human. You walk into a tomb expecting history. You leave wondering if you've been watched the whole time. The curse is real, not because it kills, but because it never really leaves. And whether it's mold, myth, or mass hysteria, the takeaway is always the same. The dead don't like being opened. So what else have we disturbed, and what might still be waiting to answer? The Hall of Records. Secrets beneath the Sphinx. It's been watching for 4,500 years. Unblinking, unmoving, half lion, half man, entirely mute. The Great Sphinx of Giza is the oldest known monumental sculpture on Earth and, for some reason, also the most suspicious. Because buried somewhere beneath those massive paws, if you believe the rumors, is a chamber full of lost knowledge, a vault that predates dynasties, a message from a forgotten world. They call it the Hall of Records. And we've been trying to get to it for centuries. How it goes is this. The story goes back further than you think, not to Egyptologists, but to prophets. In the 1920s and 30s, American mystic Edgar Cayce, a self-proclaimed sleeping prophet, claimed that under the Sphinx was a sealed hall built by survivors of Atlantis. A record of human history. A library of scrolls and wisdom untouched since 10,500 BCE. He said it would be found at the end of the 20th century. Naturally, archaeologists laughed, because of course they did. A psychic, Atlantis, no credible evidence, no reason to believe. But here's the problem with legends. Sometimes they inspire investigations that unearth very real mysteries. In 1993, a team, using ground-penetrating radar, discovered something beneath the Sphinx. Anomalies, cavities, chambers. One particularly interesting rectangular void sat directly under the Sphinx's front paws. It was perfectly shaped, perfectly placed, and completely inaccessible. The Egyptian government quickly restricted access to the site. No excavation allowed. No further scans published. Just a shrug and a press release dismissing sensational claims. Which, let's be honest, only made it more suspicious. Scientists tried to explain it. Sphinx experts like Mark Lehner, once affiliated with Cayce's foundation, awkwardly enough dismissed the idea of a Hall of Records. They insisted the Sphinx was built around 2500 BCE by Pharaoh Khafre, and that any anomalies were natural fissures or old excavation shafts. But not everyone agreed. Geologist Robert Schoch, observed deep vertical weathering patterns on the Sphinx enclosure patterns consistent with water erosion, not wind, which suggested the monument had been exposed to heavy rainfall. But here's the kicker. The last time it rained heavily in Egypt was between 7,000 and 10,000 years ago, which would mean the Sphinx, or at least its base, might be much older than the pyramids, maybe not 2,500 BCE, maybe 10,000 BCE. That shifts everything. It suggests an advanced culture predating dynastic Egypt. A culture that may have left records. Maybe even a haul. They still can't explain it because they can't agree on the Sphinx at all. Its head is disproportionately small. Some say it was recarved from an earlier lion or jackal statue. Its face is weathered beyond identification. Its construction lacks proper documentation, not even Khafre's name is inscribed on it. The official story is full of holes. Meanwhile, rumors swirl that there's a sealed shaft behind the Sphinx's ear. That early explorers found tunnels beneath its base and were ordered to cover them up. That drill tests in the 1990s hit empty space just meters below the surface and were suddenly halted. No official excavation has ever confirmed or denied these claims. They just stopped talking about it. Which is maybe more telling than anything they could say. Because if there's nothing under the Sphinx, why not just dig and prove it? And if there's something, then what? A tomb? A time capsule? A bunker from a forgotten age? Or maybe just silence, the kind that hums so loudly it becomes a warning. Here's a thought. If you were a civilization staring down the barrel of extinction, flood, fire, or some other cosmic reset, where would you hide your knowledge? In a stone vault, sealed from time. Under a monument no one could move. Guarded by a symbol that was both human and divine. Something that couldn't speak, but also couldn't forget. A sentinel. And maybe that's what the Sphinx is, not just a statue, not just a mystery, but a container of knowledge, of memory, of a past so old, we can't even recognize it anymore. And maybe that's why we've never been allowed to open the chamber, if it exists at all. Because what we find inside might rewrite everything. Who we are. Where we came from. What we've forgotten. And maybe, who helped us build. But until someone really digs, we won't know. All we have is the stare of stone, and the feeling that something underneath is waiting. So go ahead. Stand in front of the Sphinx. Look it in the eyes. Ask it what it's hiding. And if you listen long enough, you might start to hear the hum of something ancient shifting below. Imhotep's lost tomb. Where did the god of architecture go? Before Da Vinci, before Einstein, before Tesla scribbled a single lightning bolt into a napkin, there was Imhotep. He was Egypt's Leonardo, a polymath before the word existed. Chief architect, high priest, royal physician, chancellor. He designed the step pyramid of Djoser, the first pyramid ever built. He turned tombs into monuments, medicine into ritual, and stone into poetry. And then, he disappeared. Not metaphorically, literally. His tomb has never been found. Which, if you know ancient Egypt, is insane. They buried everybody. Bakers, cats, court jesters. They labeled tombs with names, dates, and job titles. They mummified teenagers with no achievements whatsoever. You die? You get a house for eternity. But the man who literally invented the tomb? Gone, missing, unmarked. How it goes is this. Imhotep lived during the 27th century BCE under Pharaoh Djoser. He's credited with designing the step pyramid at Saqqara, a 6-tiered stone structure that marked the beginning of pyramid building in Egypt. Before Imhotep, tombs were mud brick mastabas, glorified shoeboxes in the sand. He changed the game. He wasn't royal, not born into power. He earned everything, and for that, he achieved the unthinkable, deification. Hundreds of years after his death, he was worshipped as a god of healing. Pilgrims visited his temples seeking cures. The Greeks later equated him with Asclepius, their own god of medicine. He was, quite literally, immortalized. So where's his body? Shouldn't a man that important get a grand burial? A pyramid? A golden sarcophagus? A giant stone box with hieroglyphs screaming, "Genius rests here"? Instead, we've got nothing. No tomb. No confirmed mummy. No inscription saying, "Here lies Imhotep." The man who built the prototype of Egyptian eternity left no eternal trace. Scientists tried to explain it. Many assumed he'd be buried at Saqqara, near the Step Pyramid. After all, it was his masterpiece, and pharaohs loved being buried close to the divine. So, for decades, archaeologists have been digging, scanning, guessing. Nothing. Some suggest he was buried in an undiscovered chamber beneath Saqqara's already vast catacombs. That he lies somewhere in the burial shaft jungle beneath the necropolis, waiting for a ground-penetrating radar to ping him into history. Others claim he may have been interred in a secret priestly tomb, concealed to protect his legacy or status. After all, once you become a god, it's less about monuments, more about mystery. But every dig ends the same. Empty sarcophagi, misidentified mummies, dead ends. It's become a kind of academic obsession, the Where's Waldo of ancient architecture. And here's where the paranoia starts to trickle in. They still can't explain it because maybe Imhotep wasn't buried at all. Maybe he was hidden. Some theorists, and we say that with full eyebrow raise, believe Imhotep's knowledge was too advanced, that he possessed forbidden science, medicine, engineering, cosmology. Ideas centuries ahead of his time, so when he died, the priests sealed him and his knowledge away. Not to preserve it, to protect the world from it. Because what if the Step Pyramid was more than a tomb? What if it was an engineered frequency device, a structure built on ley lines, tuned to the stars, meant to harness or focus energies we no longer understand? What if Imhotep's genius wasn't just architectural, but technological? That changes the question. It's not, where is Imhotep buried? It's, what was he buried with? Some suggest his tomb, if found, might contain scrolls, blueprints lost to time. Others whisper about a book of Imhotep, a legendary text of medicine and metaphysics, a kind of pre-emerald tablet, a manual for manipulating reality. So yeah, maybe hiding it was the smart move. The idea of Imhotep became bigger than the man. He became a god, a myth, a symbol. And symbols don't die. They just move underground. But let's entertain one last possibility, the one no one dares put in their academic papers. What if Imhotep never died? Not in the zombie movie way, not in the Mummy Returns way, but in the immortalized through ritual, ascended master, dimensionally retired way. His name lived on, his temples remained active, his followers worshipped for centuries. What if Imhotep stepped outside of death? What if the tomb isn't missing? Because there was never a body to bury? Think about it. He builds the first pyramid, a structure that reshapes death into architecture. He masters healing, astronomy, sacred geometry. He cracks the code of spirit and stone. And then? He leaves. No tomb. No coffin. No clue. Just silence, the kind that sounds like design. And if you're wondering whether that's too mystical, too conspiratorial, too ancient astronaut theorist, well, you try explaining why the most famous architect of the ancient world never got a proper address in the underworld. Because if Imhotep really is lost, what other geniuses disappeared beneath the sand, and what knowledge vanished with them? The unfinished obelisk, a 1,200 Ton mistake. In the dusty heat of Aswan, southern Egypt, there lies a stone so massive it warps your sense of proportion. It doesn't stand, it slumps. Still tethered to the earth like a half-baked thought. Half-shaped, fully abandoned, and enormous. This is the unfinished obelisk. And it is, quite literally, the largest stone ever carved by human hands, or almost carved. It stretches over 137 feet in length. It weighs 1,200 tons, that's 200 African elephants, or 4 fully loaded 747 s. And the question that hangs over it like desert heat is this. Why did they stop? How it goes is this. The obelisk lies in a granite quarry near Aswan, the same quarry that supplied stone for some of Egypt's most iconic monuments. Pharaohs loved Aswan granite. It was hard, red, and sparkled in the sun like it knew something you didn't. Sometime during the reign of Hatshepsut, the ancient engineers started working on a monument of impossible ambition, a single monolith carved directly out of bedrock. It would have been the largest obelisk ever erected, taller than any known standing one by at least a third. They smoothed it, shaped it, cut channels around it. Then, at some point during the process, they stopped. A crack had formed near the base. Maybe it was a structural flaw. Maybe the granite rebelled. Maybe someone panicked. Either way, they walked away from the project. Completely. But here's the part that doesn't make sense. How are they planning to move it? Even if the stone hadn't cracked, how do you lift 1,200 tons of granite? This wasn't some freestanding sculpture. It was part of the earth. And yet, everything about the process, the smooth channels, the precise angles, suggests they had a plan. But no records exist. No notes, no diagrams. Just the tool marks, still visible in the stone like the ghosts of ambition past. Scientists tried to explain it. Some say it was a simple case of trial and error. You carve big, you fail big, move on. Try again next dynasty. Others suggest the crack was a death sentence. A weak point in a high-stress structure, like an obelisk, could cause catastrophic collapse, and in a religious culture obsessed with perfection, even a small flaw meant failure. So, they walked away. End of story. Except, no one's really tried to replicate the method. To carve this obelisk, the ancient workers used dolerite balls, hard stones they smashed repeatedly into the granite. You can still see the little impact craters. Over time, those tiny pecks formed the troughs that outline the monolith. But here's the thing. That method would take decades. Not years, decades. And that's assuming thousands of laborers working in shifts, around the clock, in 100-degree heat, with zero margin for error. And still no machinery to lift the thing out when done. There's a growing suspicion among alternative theorists that the official method doesn't scale, that it would have taken more than manpower, maybe lost tools, maybe techniques we don't understand. And that's where the whispers begin. They still can't explain it because there's no physical evidence of a working system that could lift, transport, and erect a stone that size. No ramps big enough. No levers strong enough. No wheeled platforms wide enough. No documentation at all. And yet, other obelisks were moved. Standing ones, tall ones. We still don't know exactly how, but the Egyptians did it flawlessly. And some of those obelisks now sit in places like Rome, Paris, London, and New York, still upright, still proud. So, if they could move a 300-ton obelisk, why risk building one 4 times that size? What if the unfinished obelisk wasn't a mistake? What if it was a statement? Think about it. The Egyptians were master storytellers in stone. They didn't waste effort. They didn't leave unfinished work lying around for fun. If they walked away, it meant something. Maybe the obelisk was meant to remain unfinished. Maybe the crack was symbolic a rupture in divine ambition. Maybe it marks the edge of what they could do, or what they were allowed to do. Or maybe, just maybe, they did have the means to move it. And something or someone made them stop. That's the part no one talks about. What if the problem wasn't engineering, but intervention? A divine warning, a political shift, a sudden loss of knowledge. Or maybe a change in power, a death, a coup, a curse. A single crack that unraveled everything. You don't abandon the greatest monument ever attempted unless something went terribly wrong. And when you stand next to the unfinished obelisk, it doesn't feel like failure. It feels like a message. Like a monument to limits. To the idea that even gods in stone must sometimes yield. Because if a civilization that built pyramids couldn't finish this, what were they really trying to do, and why did they stop? The lost Labyrinth of Hawara, Egypt's vanishing temple. Herodotus was a lot of things: tourist, gossip, semi-reliable historian. But one thing he wasn't was subtle. So when he described a building in Egypt that made the pyramids look like cheap condos, people listened. It had 3,000 rooms, half above ground, half below. It was filled with columns, courts, passageways, and locked chambers. Its walls were covered in carvings. Its roof was made of a single slab of stone. And Herodotus swore that even the pyramids paled in comparison. That building was called the Labyrinth of Hawara. And today, it's gone. How it goes is this. In the 5th century BCE, Herodotus visited Egypt and documented what he saw or what he was told. His description of the labyrinth is breathless. I found it surpassing even the pyramids. It has 12 courts, and the walls are covered with carvings. The roofs of all the halls are of stone, and the whole building is full of winding passages. He claimed the labyrinth stood near the pyramid of Amenemhat III in the Fayum oasis. Several other ancient authors, including Strabo, Diodorus Siculus, and Pliny the Elder, confirmed it. They all describe the same general structure, same grandeur, same sense of overwhelming scale. This wasn't myth. This was consensus. And then, sometime in the last 2,000 years, it vanished. No standing ruins. No towering walls. No epic underground chambers. Just flat ground, crumbled limestone, and a vague outline in the dirt. So what happened? Scientists tried to explain it. Archaeologists believe the labyrinth was real and that it was dismantled stone by stone in later periods. Limestone was valuable. You don't need gods to steal it, just contractors. But here's the weird part. Even after centuries of plundering, you'd still expect foundations. Or fragments. Or anything that resembles a 3,000-room mega-complex. But the ground is nearly empty. In the 19th century, Flinders Petrie, the grandfather of Egyptology, excavated the site. He confirmed that there was something there. He found foundations, pottery shards, and part of a giant stone slab, possibly the ceiling Herodotus described. But even Petrie was baffled. He expected more. You don't just lose a city-sized building. You don't forget a temple so massive it needed a map. Unless something else buried it. In 2008, a team of researchers using ground-penetrating radar claimed to detect underground anomalies at Hawara: structures, chambers, grid patterns. Rectilinear geometry consistent with walls and rooms. Their conclusion? The labyrinth might still be there, buried beneath 15 feet of Nile silt. It wasn't dismantled, it was submerged. And due to groundwater, bureaucratic restrictions, and general archaeological paralysis, no full excavation has taken place since. The most detailed underground structure in ancient Egyptian literature. And it's still hiding in the mud. They still can't explain it because none of the known plans for Amenemhat III's mortuary complex match the scale of Herodotus's descriptions. They don't even come close. Either Herodotus was lying unlikely, since other historians confirmed it, or we're dealing with a structure that hasn't been excavated yet. A second level, deeper and more vast, still slumbering under the silt. Or maybe we're missing the point. What if the labyrinth wasn't just a building? What if it was a machine? Some esoteric scholars believe the labyrinth served a ritual or energetic function, like a symbolic map of the underworld, a temple of paths, a maze for the soul. The Greeks certainly thought so. Many connected it to the myth of Daedalus and the Minotaur, a story rooted in Egypt, not Crete. They believed walking the labyrinth had transformative effects, that the journey was more than physical. Which raises another question. What if the labyrinth was never meant to be found again? What if it was used once for a ceremony, a burial, a sealing, and then purposefully erased? The idea isn't so crazy. In Egypt, sacred places were often buried on purpose to protect them from decay, theft, or misuse. The labyrinth may have held secrets, relics, or even records that later dynasties wanted hidden. Think about it. A temple bigger than a pyramid, filled with thousands of rooms. No treasure, no mummies, just walls. Why build that? Unless it wasn't about what was inside, but what it was meant to confuse. Some believe the labyrinth was designed to trap something. A spirit, a force, a truth. And if that's true, then maybe the labyrinth didn't vanish. Maybe it was sealed. Which means the warnings in the ancient texts weren't just hyperbole. They were instructions. Don't open it. Don't dig too deep. Let sleeping gods lie. Because if you built a maze to lock something away, what happens when modern man finds the entrance? The bent pyramid, a mistake or a message? At first glance, it looks like a pyramid having a midlife crisis. It starts rising like all the others, sharp, proud, defiant against the sky. Then, about halfway up, it bends, the slope changes, the angle softens. It curves inward, like it got shy, halfway through being built. This is the bent pyramid of Sneferu, and no one can agree whether it's an engineering mistake, a course correction, or a cosmic punchline. But one thing is clear. It shouldn't look like this. How it goes is this. The bent pyramid sits at Dashur, just south of Cairo. It was commissioned by Pharaoh Sneferu, the founder of the 4th dynasty and father of Khufu. Yes, that Khufu, the guy with the big one. Sneferu was a pyramid enthusiast. He built at least 3 more than any other pharaoh. Just to make sure his afterlife had options. The bent pyramid was his second attempt. It began with a steep slope of 54 degrees, a bold incline that looked great on paper until someone did the math. About halfway up, the architects changed the angle to 43 degrees. The result is a sudden kink in the shape of pyramid that looks like it flinched mid-construction. The official story? They miscalculated. The steep angle was causing structural instability. Cracks were forming. Collapse was imminent. So they adjusted and finished it off at a shallower angle. Which is fair, reasonable. The ancient world had trial and error too. Except, the bent pyramid is still standing. It hasn't collapsed, it hasn't sagged, it hasn't slid into the sand. 4,600 years later, the unstable design still holds. And that's what bothers people. Scientists tried to explain it. Most agree the angle was altered for safety, but even that theory has problems. First, the engineering techniques required to build the bent pyramid with its complex internal chambers and double entrances suggest deep forethought. This wasn't an amateur project, they knew what they were doing. Second, why not just start over? If the structure was unstable halfway through, why not abandon it like they did with the unfinished obelisk and build another? Sneferu had money, he had labor. He even went on to build the Red Pyramid, which was perfect, no bends, just symmetry. So why keep the bent pyramid? Why not hide the mistake? Unless it wasn't a mistake at all. They still can't explain it because the pyramid works too well for an error. Inside, the bent pyramid has features not found in later structures, including 2 burial chambers placed at different heights, connected by a sloped passageway. Some believe this was symbolic, a duality of death and rebirth, light and dark, high and low. Others believe the pyramid was a transition point, a bridge between 2 sacred angles. The lower portion, the steeper 54 degrees, symbolic of a spiritual ascent. The upper portion, the gentler 43 degrees, symbolic of stabilization, reincarnation, or enlightenment. Think of it not as a mistake, but as a message carved in stone. Some esoteric researchers have even suggested that the 2 angles represent celestial harmonics frequencies encoded in architecture. That the pyramid is an acoustic device designed to resonate with Earth's natural vibration or act as a tuning fork for spiritual energy. And then there's the mirroring effect. If you place a mirror horizontally across the middle of the bent pyramid, the top reflects into a perfect diamond, a double pyramid, one pointing up, one pointing down, as above, so below. Sound familiar? It should. That's ancient Hermetic symbolism, dualism, sacred geometry, cosmic symmetry, and it's embedded in a structure 1,000 years before those ideas were ever written down. Coincidence? Maybe. But maybe not. Because here's the other theory, the dark one. What if the bent pyramid was meant to warn future builders? A monument to failure. Not as a lesson in architecture, but in hubris. You start too steep, you reach too far, and the whole thing comes down. So you pivot. You compromise. You finish it bent, not broken. It becomes a metaphor for leadership. A symbol of change under pressure. Or worse, a surrender to limitations no one wants to admit exist. And here's the eerie part. The bent pyramid was never used as a tomb. No burial, no mummy, no sarcophagus. Sneferu was buried in the Red Pyramid, his next attempt. So why keep the bent one standing? Maybe because it wasn't for the dead. Maybe it was for us. A monument to duality. To the moment where perfection buckled under its own ambition. A scar in stone reminding us that even kings flinch. Because if the pyramid was meant to reach heaven, the bend tells you what happens when the heavens push back. The star shafts, stargates, spirit tubes, or something else. Inside the Great Pyramid, there are tunnels. Not hallways, not chambers, just shafts, narrow, claustrophobic passages, each about 8 inches wide. Too small for a person, too long to be decoration, too precise to be a mistake. They rise at carefully calculated angles from the king's chamber and the queen's chamber, piercing upward through millions of tons of stone, and point directly at specific stars. We call them air shafts, but that's a terrible name, because they're not for air, they're for something else. And no one can agree on what. How it goes is this. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, the largest and most studied monument on Earth, has 4 of these mysterious channels. 2 from the king's chamber, pointing north and south. 2 from the queen's chamber, also pointing north and south, though the lower ones don't even open all the way to the outside. The angles aren't random. The southern shaft from the king's chamber? It points directly at Orion's belt, specifically Al-Nitak, the star associated with Osiris, the god of death and rebirth. The northern shaft? It aims at Thuban, the pole star at the time the pyramid was built. The queen's chamber shafts, similarly aligned, point toward Sirius, the star of the goddess Isis, and another toward what may have been a sacred circumpolar star. This is not coincidence. This is star math. Laser-guided geometry from 2500 BCE. And these shafts are so well cut, engineers in the 1990s had to send robot crawlers to explore them. That's where things got even stranger. Scientists tried to explain it. When German engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink sent his robot U-2 crawling up the Southern Queen's chamber shaft, it traveled about 65 meters and encountered a door. A tiny slab with 2 copper handles, like something out of a miniature horror film. A sealed portal. So, naturally, in 2002, National Geographic sent another robot, this one with a drill and a camera to peek through. Behind the first door, another small chamber, and then another door. So there's a tunnel, leading to a sealed stone door, leading to a mystery chamber, ending in another sealed door. Nothing more has been publicly revealed since. The official explanation: these are symbolic passages, spiritual pipelines to the afterlife. The shafts allow the pharaoh's soul to escape and ascend toward the heavens, where it becomes one with the gods. That's poetic. But also suspiciously convenient. Because when you have perfectly engineered tunnels too narrow for humans, too accurate for randomness, you start to wonder, what if they're not just symbolic? What if they're functional? They still can't explain it because there's no practical reason for the shafts to exist. They aren't needed for ventilation, the internal chambers are sealed. They aren't decorative, you can't even see them without robots. They aren't structural, removing stone makes a structure weaker, not stronger. They serve no purpose, except the one we can't name. Which opens the door, pun intended, to more esoteric ideas. Some believe the shafts are resonant conduits, that the pyramid acted as a harmonic generator, and these tunnels channeled energy outward like antennae. Others suggest they were part of a stellar alignment ritual, used during coronation or burial rites to sync the pharaoh's soul with the constellations. And then there's the serious weird stuff. A fringe theory claims the shafts are time-encoded memory locks lined up with specific celestial events that, when repeated in future millennia, will unlock something inside the pyramid, like a cosmic countdown. Sound crazy? Sure. But so does carving a tunnel with millimeter precision that connects to a specific star's position 4,500 years ago, using nothing more than ropes, pulleys, and observation. There's also the awkward little fact that we still don't know what's behind those final doors. What are they hiding? A relic? A mechanism? A sealed message? Or just more stone? No one's been allowed to drill further. No one's been inside. Not even the robots. And when you consider that this pyramid has voids, sealed chambers, and star-guided shafts, you start to feel like the whole thing wasn't meant to be understood. It was meant to confuse us just enough. Like a riddle with too many answers. Or a machine we forgot how to turn on. Because what if the Great Pyramid was never a tomb? What if it was a device? A spiritual engine, a resurrection machine, a calendar keyed to the cosmos. Or maybe, just maybe, a record. A story told not in words but in angles and silence. And if the shafts really do point the way to the stars, then maybe they weren't for the pharaoh's soul at all. Maybe they were for someone else. Someone watching from the other side. The tomb of Osiris, found and forgotten? It starts with a shaft. Carved into bedrock, filled with water, hidden beneath the causeway that leads from the Sphinx to the Great Pyramid. In 1999, Egyptian archaeologist Dr. Zahi Hawass led a televised excavation that would make headlines, raise eyebrows, and then fall off the face of the earth. Because what he reportedly found down there wasn't just another chamber. It wasn't a tomb for a prince, or a high priest, or a noble. It looked a lot like the tomb of Osiris. Yes, that Osiris, god of the dead, lord of the underworld, the one who was dismembered by his jealous brother and resurrected by Isis. A myth. A god. A metaphor. Or maybe something more. How it goes is this. Using a series of deep vertical shafts beneath the Giza plateau, Hawass and his team descended through multiple levels. These were cut straight into the limestone, some filled with stagnant green water. At the very bottom, some 30 meters underground, was a large chamber. Inside, a central stone sarcophagus, now empty, surrounded by 6 smaller niches, possibly symbolic tombs. The chamber itself was carved in the shape of an ankh, the symbol of eternal life. And all of it was oriented in a way that seemed deliberately ritualistic. Hawass claimed this was a symbolic tomb, a cenotaph, a representation of Osiris's burial, not the real thing. But that explanation felt rushed. No one had known this chamber was there. It wasn't listed in maps. It wasn't shown to the public. The dig was televised once, then never again. Follow-up documentation? Sparse. Photos? Rare. Access? Denied. The location has since been sealed. Scientists tried to explain it. The official line: this was part of the late-period Osiris cult, a ceremonial tomb built by priests to honor the god. Nothing literal, nothing divine. Just another subterranean ritual site, one of many. But if that's true, why the secrecy? Why seal it? Why was the water left inside? And more disturbingly, why hasn't anyone else been allowed to study it? Alternative theorists, as expected, pounced. Some suggested the chamber predates dynastic Egypt altogether, possibly dating back to 10,000 BCE, and was only co-opted by later religious cults. Others claimed it was the real tomb of someone who inspired the myth of Osiris, that maybe Osiris was never just a god but a real person, a deified ruler, buried and reborn through legend. And if you entertain that possibility, the implications stretch farther than the Nile. Because it suggests the entire Osiris myth, the dismemberment, the death, the resurrection, may be historical allegory. A memory passed down as religion. A trauma preserved as theology. It suggests that, long before the dynasties, there was a king, and a brother, and a body. And that body might still be somewhere under Giza. They still can't explain it because they stopped talking about it. Literally. After the televised special in 1999, the site was quietly closed off. No academic papers, no peer-reviewed follow-ups, no international teams invited, just silence. And you have to ask, why? If it's just a symbolic chamber, what's the harm in studying it? Why not finish the excavation? Why not go further? Unless they already did, and didn't like what they found. Because here's where things get slippery. The ancient texts describe Osiris's tomb as being beneath the earth, in a chamber surrounded by water, under a hill near a sacred lion. The Sphinx, in many older traditions, is linked to the lion. The Giza Plateau, full of hills. The chamber, subterranean and waterlogged. The match is uncomfortably close. Which means either ancient priests were incredibly committed to storytelling accuracy. The myths are based on actual structures, or we've just dug up something we were never meant to understand. Because what if the myths weren't fiction? What if they were redacted history? And the tomb wasn't symbolic. It was a warning. Or a container. Think about it. You build a chamber under the most sacred place in your civilization. You fill it with water. You seal it shut. You build the Sphinx on top. And then you wait for the story to fade into religion. Because maybe Osiris wasn't just a god of the dead. Maybe he was someone or something we couldn't afford to forget. Or worse, something we couldn't risk remembering. The Dendera light, ancient electricity or cosmic metaphor. On the walls of the Temple of Hathor, deep in the Dendera complex, there's a carving that refuses to behave. It's tucked away in a crypt, a chamber few tourists ever reach. It's not grand, it's not flashy, it's not even well lit. And yet, what it shows has launched 1,000 late-night documentaries and more than one wildly overconfident YouTube channel. Because it looks like this. A god or priest standing beside an elongated glass-like object shaped like a bulb. Inside it, a serpent curling like a filament. A thick stem at the base. A wire-like tail connecting to what looks like a box. It's been called the Dendera light. And depending on who you ask, it's either a symbolic depiction of rebirth, a misunderstood religious motif, or a 2,000-year-old electrical device. How it goes is this. The temple itself dates to the Ptolemaic period, roughly 300 BCE, though the site is far older. Like many Egyptian holy places, newer temples were built atop older ones, preserving older traditions, and sometimes older secrets. The Dendera crypts are unique. They're small, narrow, and hard to access, and on these walls are some of the strangest reliefs in Egypt. The Dendera light is the most famous. One version shows the device being held by a god, with ankh-tipped cords extending toward a square box labeled as the energy of the gods. Another version includes baboon-headed figures, linked to Thoth, god of knowledge. The mainstream explanation? It's a mythological scene. The serpent represents the god Harsomptus, emerging from a lotus flower, a symbol of rebirth and cosmic balance. The bulb? Just a stylized womb or vessel. The box? A plinth. The tail? A decorative flourish. Calm down. But here's the issue. It really looks like a light bulb. Scientists tried to explain it. Mainstream Egyptologists maintain that the Dendera images are purely symbolic, artistic conventions, nothing more. But electrical engineers have examined the reliefs and said, yeah, that could work. In the 1990s, a team in Austria built a working model based on the relief, a Crookes tube filled with gas, powered by high voltage. The serpent-like arc of electricity curved exactly like the Dendera carving. It glowed, it worked. So if it's theoretically possible, could the Egyptians have done it? Maybe. But here come the problems. There's no evidence of electrical infrastructure, no power sources, no wires, no carbon residue. No sockets, no switches, no burnt-out bulbs. No copper cables running under temple floors like ancient conduit spaghetti. And yet, many Egyptian tombs have no soot marks on the ceilings. If they used torches or oil lamps to paint and carve, why isn't there blackening from thousands of years of fire? Some speculate they used reflective mirrors, but that gets inefficient fast. Others say they used highly controlled flame. Still others whisper about Dendera. They still can't explain it because the image is too anomalously technical. It's not just that it looks like a bulb, it's that the entire composition suggests a power system, a circuit. The bulb, the power box, the cable, the operator, the arc. Even if it's myth disguised as mechanics. And it raises the usual uncomfortable question. If they didn't have electricity, why does it look like they did? Is this a coincidence? Is it a case of modern minds projecting technology backward onto symbolism? Or did someone somewhere preserve a memory of a time when light didn't come from fire? There's also the esoteric view that the Dendera device was metaphysical, not electrical, that the light it depicts wasn't literal, but spiritual illumination. In this view, the crypt was an initiation chamber. The imagery was symbolic of awakening, not voltage. The light of Thoth, the serpent of wisdom, the womb of transformation. So maybe the Dendera light wasn't meant to glow but to enlighten. And that might be the most Egyptian answer of all. Because when you stare at the Dendera light long enough, you start to realize it doesn't matter what it is. What matters is what it makes you ask. Were the Egyptians using science to serve religion? Or were they encoding science inside religion? Was light sacred? Or was the sacred made of light? Either way, the carving glows with a mystery that no one's quite managed to turn off. Because if this was an electrical device, it rewrites the timeline. And if it wasn't, it still might be the most advanced metaphor ever chiseled into stone. The abyss below Giza, tunnels, floods, and buried cities. Beneath Giza is silence. Not the silence of open desert, not the holy hush of tombs. This is the wet, heavy silence of tunnels. Of something massive beneath something older. A place that shouldn't exist and yet refuses to go away. Over the decades, rumors have surfaced whispered by locals, hinted at by explorers, and occasionally glimpsed by researchers of a vast subterranean complex beneath the Giza Plateau. Not just tombs, not just catacombs, but vaults, chambers, entire halls sealed, forgotten, and possibly flooded. A lost city. Or, worse, a city meant to stay lost. How it goes is this. The idea of an underground Giza isn't new. Even Herodotus mentioned passageways beneath the plateau corridors connecting pyramids to temples, kings to gods, the living to the afterlife. In 1935, British explorer Dr. Selim Hassan excavated deep shafts and chambers under the plateau. His notes, some of which were never published in full, referenced underground rooms and water-filled galleries that didn't match known tombs. Later, Andrew Collins, a writer and researcher, claimed to have uncovered evidence of a massive cave system beneath the plateau. With the help of local informants and remote sensing, he described a network of chambers and corridors stretching beneath the Sphinx and toward the pyramids, one allegedly the size of a cathedral. In the 1990s, ground-penetrating radar studies, some conducted by Thomas Dobecki and John Anthony West, revealed geometric anomalies under the Giza Plateau, rectangular voids, subterranean cavities, chambers in places that, officially, were supposed to be solid bedrock. And in 2017, Zahi Hawass, in an uncharacteristic moment of semi-acknowledgement, admitted in an interview that there were many things beneath Giza that had not been excavated and may not be for a long time. But these statements were never followed up. The digs were halted. The research stopped. Or was it buried? Scientists tried to explain it. Mainstream Egyptology admits that yes, there are tunnels under Giza. Some are natural fissures in the limestone. Others are man-made shafts, connected to known tombs or burial pits. But the idea of a massive, organized complex, a literal underground city, that's dismissed as fringe theory. Still, explorers who ventured into restricted areas describe water-filled passageways with finished walls, chambers too large for burials, niches with no clear purpose and no inscriptions, long corridors that seem to go nowhere. And the water is the most disturbing part. Flooded tunnels have been found in multiple locations across the plateau. The most infamous is the one under the so-called Osiris shaft, near the Sphinx Causeway, a chamber 100 feet down, submerged in green, stagnant water. What's under that water? We don't know. Because no one's allowed to find out. Which, again, raises a question. If there's nothing down there, why does access keep getting denied? And if there's something, what kind of something is worth keeping quiet for nearly a century? They still can't explain it because they've never excavated most of it. The Egyptian government's official stance is one of preservation, which, to be fair, is valid. You don't just dig around the foundations of a 4,500-year-old monument without consequences. But preservation often becomes the perfect excuse for secrecy. And when that secrecy surrounds sealed underground structures in the most sacred part of the ancient world, it's not long before the conspiracy theorists move in. Some claim the tunnels are part of an ancient initiation system, a school for priests, or even guardians of ancient knowledge. Others believe the subterranean network was a refuge, a bunker from a prehistoric cataclysm, built by a civilization that survived the flood and passed their wisdom on to dynastic Egypt. Still others say the Giza Plateau was never just a necropolis but a machine, and the underground system is part of its power source, now dormant. But the most disturbing theory, that whatever is down there is not entirely dead. Not people, not mummies, but concepts. Dangerous ones. Things that can't be unlearned once found. Which is why no government, ancient or modern, has dared open the deepest vaults. Because the Giza Plateau, for all its sunlight and symmetry, sits atop a locked basement. A vault. A prison. A secret carved into stone, buried in water, and forgotten on purpose. And if we ever do open it, we won't just be digging through rock. We'll be breaking a seal. The animal mummy apocalypse, mass sacrifice, or something stranger. You expect to find a few cats in ancient Egypt, maybe a mummified crocodile or two, an ibis if you're lucky. What you don't expect is millions. Mass graves, warehouse-sized crypts, entire tunnels lined with animal coffins stacked like inventory. Cats, falcons, snakes, baboons, bulls, beetles, mongoose, shrews. If it walked, crawled, flew, or slithered, the Egyptians probably wrapped it in linen and gave it a sarcophagus. We're not talking about pets buried with their owners. We're talking about industrial-scale mummification. The animal mummy apocalypse. And here's the weirdest part. We still don't know why. How it goes is this. Animal cults were central to ancient Egyptian religion. Every major deity had an animal counterpart. Bastet had cats. Thoth had ibises and baboons. Horus had falcons. Anubis got the jackals. Sobek got the crocodiles. And don't even get started on scarabs. So yes, animals were sacred. They were messengers, symbols, even avatars of the gods. But starting around 700 BCE, something shifted. Animal burials exploded in popularity. Temples became mummy factories. Priests bred animals in captivity, sacrificed them en masse, mummified the corpses, and sold them to pilgrims. These were offering spiritual bribes. You paid for a cat mummy, and your prayer got fast-tracked to Bastet. Some estimates suggest over 70 million animals were mummified. Let that sink in. 70 million. To put that in perspective, that's more than the human population of Egypt today. Scientists tried to explain it. Early Egyptologists assumed these were pets or elite ritual animals, but most of the mummies are too poorly preserved for that. CT scans show that many are incomplete, just bones or bundles of feathers. Some contain no remains at all, just cloth, resin, and air. Fake mummies, mass-produced spiritual placeholders. It was a business. But what kind of business needs to produce millions of corpses? And where did they go? Catacombs have been found in Tuna el Gebel, ibises and baboons. Saqqara, cats and bulls. Crocodile Hill in Kam Ombo, Guess. And even tiny tombs for scarab beetles. These aren't one-offs, they're industries. They required infrastructure, labor, ritual knowledge, economic coordination. All for animals that were bred, killed, and buried sometimes within hours. And still, the motivation feels too clinical. Too transactional for a civilization that buried its dead with golden masks and divine poetry. Which raises the real question. Were the Egyptians just honoring the gods, or were they feeding something? They still can't explain it because no theory fully justifies the scale. Devotion? Sure. Symbolism? Of course. But 70 million? Why go to such extremes? Some historians now speculate that the practice wasn't just about appeasement but containment. That the animal cults were ritual management systems, mechanisms for absorbing, neutralizing, or redirecting cosmic energy. The mummified animals weren't gifts, they were barriers. Offerings, yes, but also locks. Think about it. You're trying to control chaos, death, time. So you sacrifice in cycles. Millions of lives, small, replaceable, symbolic. Over and over. For centuries. What does that sound like? A spell. On repeat. A loop, a program, a firewall made of bones. Or maybe it was even stranger than that. Some researchers believe that the animal cults weren't worshipping symbols but chimeras, beings, hybrid gods, entities older than language. In this theory, the animals were avatars' bodies for something else to inhabit. The act of mummifying them? Containment. Like stuffing lightning into a jar and burying it before it strikes. In 2015, scientists in Manchester CT scanned hundreds of animal mummies. What they found wasn't just bones, it was inconsistency, errors, missing parts, strange arrangements. A pattern of failure. Or maybe a pattern of warning. Because if the mummies weren't always real, maybe it was never about the animal. Maybe it was about the ritual, the wrapping, the burial, the repetition. As if the world depended on doing it just right. And if that's true, then what happens when the ritual stops? What happens when the offerings run out? What did they keep feeding, and what happens when it gets hungry again? The Rosetta Stone, codebreaker or censorship. It cracked the code. It unlocked a language. It gave the dead a voice and turned scribbles into scripture. The Rosetta Stone is often treated like Egypt's final answer. The end of mystery. The moment when ancient walls began to speak. But what if we got it wrong? Or worse, what if we decoded only what we were meant to understand? Because here's the irony. The Rosetta Stone told us how to read hieroglyphs. But no one ever asks why it had to be written 3 times. Or what it isn't telling us. How it goes is this. Discovered in 1799 by French soldiers during Napoleon's campaign in Egypt, the Rosetta Stone was found near the town of Rashid, or Rosetta, buried in the foundation of a crumbling wall. It's not gold, it's not grand. It's a dark granodiorite stele, about 4 feet tall. But etched into it is the same passage in 3 scripts. Hieroglyphic for the gods. Demotic for the priests. Greek for the bureaucrats. And what does it say? Basically, a tax break. No, seriously, the text is a decree issued in 196 BCE by priests honoring Ptolemy V. It lists his good deeds, declares his divine status, and says the decree should be displayed in all 3 scripts, a PR campaign carved in stone. But this dull administrative record ended up being the key that Jean-François Champollion used to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphs in 1822. Cue the textbooks, cue the triumph, cue the museum plaque. But then come the questions. Why was it buried? Why was it fragmented? Why was the same text written in 3 different languages when the audience was mostly illiterate? And most importantly, what don't we have? Scientists tried to explain it. It was likely buried or reused as building material during the late Roman or early Islamic periods. Egypt was full of old stones, temples were pillaged for construction. The Rosetta Stone, unassuming and broken, was probably just rubble. Except, it was deliberately inscribed in 3 languages. By priests. During a politically unstable era. Using religious, civil, and foreign scripts. That's not casual. And while it unlocked hieroglyphs for us, it's never been clear how comprehensive the translation is. Scholars admit that Egyptian hieroglyphs are symbolically dense. Each glyph can mean multiple things depending on context, tone, placement, the reader. You don't just translate that into Greek and move on. You interpret it. You filter it. So the Rosetta Stone gave us access to the language, but not necessarily to the intent behind it. Some researchers now believe hieroglyphs were multi-layered communication tools encoding meaning not just phonetically but energetically, sacred resonance, sound, form, idea. In that view, translating them into Greek bureaucratic prose is like trying to translate a symphony into an Excel spreadsheet. Something gets lost. Or worse, something gets left out. They still can't explain it because we don't know if the Rosetta Stone was the original. Many believe it was a copy, one of many steles, that repeated the same decree, scattered across Egypt like divine press releases. Others suspect it was a reproduction from an older source. But what if it wasn't about making the language accessible? What if it was about controlling what got passed on? Think about it. You're a priest in a collapsing civilization. Greek overlords, internal unrest, spiritual confusion. So you take your sacred language, one passed down from the time of the gods, and boil it down into a digestible, politically safe format. You translate it into the language of power, of trade, of compromise. And then you bury it. Not to preserve it. To delay it. Maybe the Rosetta Stone wasn't a Rosetta Stone. Maybe it was a time capsule. Something left for a later generation, us to crack open. Not to understand what the ancients knew, but to understand what they were afraid to say out loud. Because if hieroglyphs really were a sacred system, a magical language, then decoding them was never just about words. It was about waking something up. And maybe that's why so much of what we read in translation feels hollow, dry, repetitive, boring. Because we're not reading the real message. We're reading the edited one. A stone full of half-truths. A translation that works only on the surface. So the question becomes, if the Rosetta Stone was a filter, where's the full broadcast? The face of the Sphinx, Khafre, stranger, or something older. You can stand in front of the great Sphinx of Giza for hours and never get an answer. It doesn't blink. It doesn't budge. It just stares with a face so familiar and yet so utterly unconfirmed. Who is it? Ask the tour guides and they'll chant in unison, Khafre. Ask the textbooks and they'll nod vaguely and say, probably Khafre. Ask the Sphinx itself and you'll get silence, but the kind that itches behind your eyes. Because the truth is, we don't know whose face this really is. And the theories that try to answer that question raise far more troubling ones. How it goes is this. The Sphinx is the largest monolithic statue on Earth. 240 feet long, 66 feet high. Carved from a single ridge of limestone that's older than your entire civilization. Traditionally, it's said to represent Pharaoh Khafre, who ruled during the 4th dynasty, the same guy credited with building the 2nd pyramid at Giza. The logic is circular. Khafre built the pyramid next to it. Therefore, the Sphinx must depict him. Because it's near his pyramid. Which we know is his because it's near the Sphinx. That's not evidence, that's a polite loop of assumptions. There is no inscription on the Sphinx naming Khafre. No cartouche, no hieroglyph. Nothing carved on the Sphinx itself to identify the face. So we rely on stylistic comparisons, the shape of the nose, what's left of it, the angle of the jaw, the way the headdress falls. But here's the issue. The face doesn't match other statues of Khafre. Its features are softer, more rounded, less symmetrical. Some believe it shows Nubian characteristics, suggesting a different ethnicity altogether. Others point out that the face is too small for the body. That's right, proportionally, the Sphinx's head is undersized. It doesn't match the lion's body and scale, as if it were carved later, over something older. Which opens the real door. What if the Sphinx was recarved? What if the original head, now lost, depicted something else? A lion? A jackal? A god no one wanted to name? Scientists tried to explain it. Mainstream Egyptologists maintain that the Sphinx was carved during Khafre's reign, based on a causeway linking his pyramid to the Sphinx temple and vague alignment theories. But in 1991, geologist Robert Schoch shook the foundation. He proposed that the deep vertical weathering on the Sphinx's enclosure could only be caused by prolonged heavy rainfall, the kind Egypt hasn't seen since around 7000 BCE. That would make the base of the Sphinx thousands of years older than Khafre. The Egyptology world did not take this well. They accused Schoch of everything from amateurism to heresy. But others began to join the chorus, including John Anthony West, who argued the Sphinx was part of a forgotten pre-dynastic civilization, later co-opted by the pharaohs. And if that's true, then the face we see now isn't the original. It's a cover-up, a replacement, a political move, or a tribute made centuries later, carving a pharaoh's face onto a god's body. They still can't explain it because the inconsistencies won't go away. The Sphinx faces exactly due east, perfectly aligned to the rising sun on the spring equinox. Its body is leonine, yet there are no known statues from Khafre's era combining lion and man. Its temple is built from limestone blocks quarried directly from the Sphinx's body blocks so massive, their placement is an engineering riddle in itself. It's as if the Sphinx wasn't a project, it was a rescue operation. A preservation of something older. Something sacred. Something not meant to be understood, only preserved. And here's the uncomfortable possibility. Maybe the original Sphinx didn't have a human face at all. Maybe it had the head of a lion, aligning with the constellation Leo around 10,500 BCE, when the Sphinx would have faced its celestial twin on the horizon. Or maybe it had no face. Maybe it was a blank vessel, a spiritual node, a cosmic mirror, a symbol of eternity, not yet personalized by human ego. Until someone, maybe Khafre, maybe not, came along and said, "Number, let my face be remembered." And in doing so, recarved history. Literally. Which means every photograph we've ever taken, every tourist selfie, every glossy National Geographic cover, might be showing us a forgery, a mask, hiding an older god. Or something stranger. Because if the Sphinx doesn't show us a king, and if it isn't Khafre, then whose face is it? And what did the original one look like? Or, perhaps more chillingly, what happened to the face that used to be there? The Serapeum Redux, the box that shouldn't be opened. We've been here before. The Serapeum of Saqqara, Egypt's underground crypt of stone. Home to 24 granite sarcophagi, each heavier than a locomotive, each carved to such surgical precision you could seal fate inside and never let it leak. They call them the bull boxes. But let's be honest, no bull ever needed polished black granite precision to the micron. We already asked why these were built. But now we need to ask something darker. What happens if one opens? How it goes is this. Somewhere along the quiet halls of the Serapeum lies a box slightly different than the others. It's not better carved. It's not newer. But its lid is cracked open. Just slightly. Enough to notice. Enough to wonder. The first reports came in hushed tones, amateur videos, fringe forums, whispers from travelers who claimed to see the gap. Not a full breach, but a shift, like something pressed upward from the inside. Just a fraction of an inch, just enough to make you stop breathing for a second. Was it natural? Seismic? Symbolic? And then, silence. Official Egyptology says nothing. Tour guides are told to steer guests away. The chamber isn't photographed. And any attempt to get a detailed look, blocked. So of course the theories spiral. Scientists tried to explain it. One hypothesis offered unofficially is that the lid cracked from stress, natural settling, a shift in the foundation, Heat expansion, earthquakes, you know geology. Fair. Rational. Boring. But here's the problem. The granite used in the Serapeum is Aswan black, incredibly strong, resistant to cracking, and carved with tools we still haven't identified. If the lid cracked due to stress, why only one? Why not all 24? Why just that box? And why does it appear to have cracked upward? You don't have to believe in curses or monsters to find that suspicious. You just have to ask, what's inside that we never found? Because remember, most of the Serapeum boxes are empty. No bones, no bowls, no offerings. But some researchers, including rogue insiders, claim one box wasn't empty. That during early excavations in the 19th century, a sealed sarcophagus was opened. Inside, not a bull, but a humanoid skeleton. Larger than normal, distorted. Wrapped in linen, positioned unnaturally, as if folded into the container. The story was suppressed, the remains removed. No photos, no records. Just a whisper that someone opened the wrong box and saw something they weren't supposed to. They still can't explain it because you're not supposed to ask. The Serapeum is closed off for a reason, not for preservation but for containment. You don't build 24 perfectly sealed granite vaults just to leave them empty. You don't carve boxes that could survive an earthquake, a flood, or time itself unless you wanted what was inside to never get out. So what if these weren't tombs? What if they were cells? Containment units. Vaults not for honoring the divine, but for locking it away. And if that's true, then the box with the cracked lid isn't just a mystery, it's a leak. A pressure valve. A stress fracture in a wall between worlds. Or maybe it's worse than that. Maybe something woke up. Maybe something moved. Or maybe something inside was trying to get out. And that leads to the real question. Why hasn't it been resealed? Unless it can't be. Unless whatever broke that lid did so with the kind of force granite doesn't recover from. And the people in charge of watching these things decided it was safer to leave it as is, no more prodding, no more drilling, just darkness, silence, and hope. Hope that the box doesn't open any further. Hope that nothing else shifts. Because if even one of those ancient vaults contains more than stone, then the Serapeum wasn't a tomb. It was a prison. And the question isn't, why did they build these boxes? It's, who or what were they trying to keep in? The 120-year drought, the century Egypt forgot. If Egypt was a miracle of geography, then the Nile was the spell that made it work. Every year, like divine clockwork, the river flooded. It fed crops, carved fields, sustained cities, and reminded everyone that the gods or the engineers still cared. But then, around 2200 BCE, something broke. The river stopped flooding. The skies stopped raining. The scribes stopped writing. And Egypt entered one of its darkest, most mysterious periods. A 120-year drought so severe it ended the Old Kingdom and nearly erased an empire. The name historians give it? The First Intermediate Period. A nice, polite euphemism for total collapse. How it goes is this. The Old Kingdom was Egypt's age of pyramids, the 4th through 6th dynasties. Khufu, Khafre, Menkaure. Stone-on-stone legacy building. Immortality as national infrastructure. But toward the end of the 6th dynasty, things began to unravel. The central government weakened. Tomb inscriptions shrank in grandeur. Monuments halted mid-construction. And then, silence. For over a century, Egypt left no great inscriptions. No temples, no pyramids, no royal records. It's as if the country held its breath and blacked out. When it came to, the landscape was different. Small kings, local warlords, decentralized rule. No more monument building, no more grand cosmic order. The gods had gone quiet. Scientists tried to explain it. Climatologists point to global evidence of a major climate event. Tree ring data, ice core samples, and sediment analysis show a prolonged megadrought around 2200 BCE, not just in Egypt, but across the Middle East, Mesopotamia, China, and even parts of Europe. They call it the 4.2 kilo-year event, a massive shift in weather patterns that collapsed civilizations. In Egypt, it meant the Nile's flood cycle failed. For a society built entirely on that rhythm, the consequences were apocalyptic. Famine, civil unrest, plague, mass abandonment of cities. Ancient records, though sparse, hint at the chaos. One text, the Admonitions of Ipuwer, reads more like a post-apocalyptic screenplay. Behold, the river is blood, and one drinks from it. The rich are full of lamentation, and the poor rejoice. All is ruin. Hyperbole? Maybe. But despair doesn't exaggerate for fun. They still can't explain it because Egypt never acknowledged it directly. You'd expect a civilization obsessed with order and ritual to document a catastrophe. But there are no grand reliefs of the drought. No temples depicting the gods weeping over a dry Nile. No ceremonies of reconciliation. Just a hole in time. A forgotten century. And that raises a disturbing possibility. What if it wasn't just a drought? What if something else happened? Some researchers have noted odd discontinuities in Egypt's architectural evolution during this period. Tools regressed. Art became cruder. Religious practice fractured. The center didn't just collapse, it was wiped clean, as if by design. What kind of disaster causes a civilization to not only crumble, but to stop remembering itself? Unless someone told them not to. Or worse, unless memory itself was the casualty. And here's where the theories spiral. That the drought was only the surface-level cause. That something else emerged from beneath, from beyond, from within. That the temples were emptied, not by famine but by fear. That ritual knowledge was lost or sealed because of what it accidentally unleashed. Some even believe the Serapeum, the Osiris shaft, or the hidden voids in the pyramid were sealed during this time, that they were emergency measures, not funeral projects. Not tombs. Locks. And if that's the case, then the first intermediate period wasn't just a collapse. It was a quarantine. A way of pressing pause on a civilization that got too close to something it wasn't supposed to know. And when the drought finally ended, when the river returned, when the gods were invited back, Egypt reset itself. New kings, new dynasties. Same monuments, different meaning. And no one ever spoke of the lost century again. The temple of millions of years, built for eternity, erased in silence. Ancient Egypt didn't do anything halfway. They didn't build for decades. They built for dynasties. When they said forever, they meant sandstone. They meant align it with the stars and etch our names into the moonlight. So when a pharaoh built something and called it the Temple of Millions of Years, you expected it to last. But one such temple referenced in texts, described in detail, drawn by explorers, has vanished without a trace. Not destroyed. Not buried. Just erased. How it goes is this. The phrase, Temple of Millions of Years, wasn't unique. It was used to describe the mortuary temples of pharaohs. But this particular one belonged to Imhotep III, one of Egypt's greatest kings. He ruled during the 18th dynasty, at the height of Egypt's imperial power, a golden age. The man built statues the size of skyscrapers. He erected temples that rivaled cities. His legacy was immense. The temple we're talking about sat on the west bank of Thebes, near the modern-day city of Luxor. It was supposed to be grander than Karnak, more elaborate than Luxor Temple. A monument not to death, but to divine kingship. Travelers in antiquity described it. It was noted by ancient Greek historians. Even Napoleon's surveyors sketched the outline of its foundations. And now? Nothing. The only thing left are two massive statues, the Colossi of Memnon, standing like lonely punctuation marks in an empty field. No temple, no ruins. Just flat land and a strange sense of absence. Scientists tried to explain it. The official story is this. Amenhotep III's temple was built too close to the floodplain. The Nile shifted, the soil became unstable. Over centuries, the foundation was undermined, the stone was reused, and the rest dissolved into mud and memory. Reasonable, boring, reassuring. Except that explanation doesn't quite work. Other temples nearby built on similar terrain still stand. There's no record of the temple being systematically dismantled. The Colossi survived, and they were part of the same complex. No archaeologist has ever found even a single wall intact or even definitively belonging to the temple itself. It's like it was never there. But it was. We have written records. We have measurements. We have plans. So where did it go? They still can't explain it because the temple wasn't just built for worship. It was built for ritual. This wasn't just a memorial, it was a cosmic interface. A place to perform the Sed festival, a royal rejuvenation rite meant to renew the pharaoh's power by symbolically killing and rebirthing him as a god. Some scholars believe the temple was designed with intentional impermanence, not because they expected it to collapse, but because it was meant to vanish. A one-time structure. A ritual construct, not an architectural one. A temple built not to last, but to fade. Others speculate darker causes. That the temple wasn't dismantled, it was erased. Not by flood, but by political order. Amenhotep III's son was Akhenaten, the monotheistic rebel who tried to wipe out Egypt's gods and replace them with the solar disk, Aten. In this view, the temple of millions of years was destroyed as part of a spiritual coup. Its rituals were too powerful, its design too threatening. Its symbolism tied to old gods, an obstacle to monotheistic propaganda. And so it was taken down, piece by piece. Erased from stone. Erased from memory. Except, it didn't work. Because we remember the absence. And absence? That's the loudest presence of all. Here's one more theory, unprovable of course, which makes it perfect. What if the temple was never just physical? What if it was constructed with stone and time, a structure meant to exist only under a specific alignment? Built to appear. To function. And then to disappear when the cycle ended. A calendar temple, a one-shot machine, a myth made temporarily real. That would explain its scale, its disappearance, the intensity of silence around it. Because if you built something to interface with eternity, you might not want it hanging around once the gods were done using it. So, the next time you pass the Colossi of Memnon, two stone giants sitting awkwardly in an empty field, don't ask where the temple went. Ask what happened when it was there. And why the desert was so eager to take it back. The impossible stone cuts of Abu Rawash. Forgotten tools, remembered scars. There's nothing flashy about Abu Rawash. It's not on the postcards. It's not on the tour bus route. It's barely even on the map, a few scattered ruins about 8 kilometers north of Giza. But if you walk its forgotten slopes and run your hand along its exposed rock, you'll feel it. The cuts. Too smooth. Too sharp. Too straight. This isn't natural erosion. This isn't chisel work. This is precision stone shaping, at a level Egyptologists still can't account for. And the worst part? No one talks about it. How it goes is this. Abu Rawash was once home to the pyramid of Dendera, son of Khufu. Today, it's mostly rubble, collapsed blocks, weathered bedrock, and the echoes of something that almost was. Most believe the pyramid was never finished, or if it was dismantled possibly by later rulers or opportunistic stone thieves. But scattered around the site are pieces of highly finished granite, basalt, and limestone. And they're not just carved. They're machine-cut, or appear to be. Perfectly flat surfaces, as if polished with diamond-grade tools. Drill holes so uniform and so deep, modern engineers wince. Curves and recesses that would require rotary motion and mechanical consistency. This isn't about effort. This is about technology. The kind of cuts that shouldn't exist in 2500 BCE. And yet there they are. Weathered, silent, too clean to ignore. Too precise to explain away as just really good stonemasonry. Scientists tried to explain it. Some mainstream Egyptologists admit the cuts are interesting. They suggest the use of abrasive copper saws, sand, water, and endless manpower. But that only gets you so far. Geologist Dr. Robert Schoch and engineer Christopher Dunn have analyzed similar cuts at other sites and found tool marks consistent with high-speed rotary machinery, the kind you'd find in a modern workshop, not a Bronze Age quarry. Dunn, in particular, argues that many of these cuts show concentric scoring patterns, suggesting circular blades or tubular drills. And not just any drills, ones that exerted enormous pressure, far beyond what soft copper tools could generate. It's not just the presence of the cuts. It's the absence of corresponding tools. You can't hide this kind of technology. You either had it or you didn't. So either ancient Egyptians were using tools we've never found, they inherited a method from an older civilization, or someone else was doing the cutting. And when you stand in the quarry at Abu Rawash, staring at a stone trench that looks like it was machined last week, the third option doesn't seem that crazy. They still can't explain it because the narrative is too fragile. Egyptology is built on a timeline, one that requires progress, not regression. If the earliest pyramids and temples show the most precision, and later ones look less refined, then either Egypt forgot how to build, or Egypt was imitating something older. Abu Rawash feels like a scar, a leftover from a toolset no one else had access to. And if those tools ever existed, where are they now? Gone, buried, hidden, or simply not what we think they were? And here's the weirder question. Why was Djedepri's pyramid left unfinished? This was Khufu's son, a legitimate heir. He built far from Giza, broke tradition, and then vanished from the king list. Some believe he was overthrown, others say he died young. But maybe, just maybe, he was building something different. Something he shouldn't have been building. What if Abu Rawash wasn't abandoned because it failed, but because it worked too well? What if Djedepri's builders unearthed, or rediscovered, something ancient, a technique, a machine, a method? And what if someone made sure it stayed buried? Because these cuts, these impossible, silent wounds in stone, don't lie. They whisper of a technology lost, a knowledge reburied, a story carved and then silenced. But the stone remembers. It always does. The pyramid that was never a tomb, Khufu's empty legacy. There it stands. The Great Pyramid of Giza. The last surviving wonder of the ancient world. Almost 500 feet tall when it was built, over 2 million blocks of stone. Aligned to true north within 1/50th of a degree. It's perfect. Timeless. Unshakable. and possibly completely misclassified. Because for all the books, documentaries, and tourist brochures that call it Khufu's tomb, there's one tiny detail that keeps nagging. There's no body. How it goes is this. The official story is that the pyramid was built during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu, also known as Cheops, around 2580 BCE. It was his final resting place, a colossal monument to his power, destined to outlive time itself. But when al-Ma'mun, the 9th century caliph of Baghdad, tunneled into the pyramid looking for treasure, he didn't find gold. He didn't find a mummy. He didn't find anything. The king's chamber, the central cavity within the pyramid, was empty. All it contained was a granite box, open, uninscribed, and undecorated. No sarcophagus, no lid. No body, no burial goods. Just an echo. Modern Egyptologists say the pyramid was likely looted in antiquity. That the burial was disturbed. That the grave goods were stripped, the mummy destroyed. But here's the problem. There are no signs of a burial ever taking place. No residue. No coffin fragments. No funerary plaster. No traces of organic material. No soot from torches, no ceiling blocks. Nothing. Not even a cartouche bearing Khufu's name inside the pyramid itself. The only graffiti linking Khufu to the Great Pyramid was found in a small upper chamber scrawled by workers, not priests. And even that's been accused of being a 19th century forgery. Which means the biggest, most mathematically advanced structure in human history may have never held a corpse. Scientists tried to explain it. The looting theory remains the standard. But the details keep falling apart. Why is the internal layout so complex, with multiple chambers and strange shafts, if it was just a tomb? Why build a grand gallery the size of a cathedral just to lead to an empty box? Why is there no artwork inside, not a single hieroglyph, not even a name? Other pyramids had art, coffins, inscriptions, rituals. The Great Pyramid? Silence. Some Egyptologists have dared to suggest the obvious. Maybe it wasn't a tomb. Maybe it was never meant to be. They still can't explain it because everything about the pyramid points to a different function. Its base is aligned with incredible precision to the cardinal points. Its dimensions encode pi and the golden ratio. The shafts point to specific stars: Orion, Sirius, Thuban. The king's chamber uses granite beams weighing 50 tons stacked in 5 layers, with a design more suitable for containing pressure than for spiritual symbolism. Some researchers believe the pyramid was a resonant structure built to amplify sound, energy, or frequency. Others believe it was a stellar observatory, or even a power generator, part of a forgotten science of sacred geometry and planetary harmonics. And some go even further. What if the pyramid wasn't built for the dead, but for the living? What if it was a chamber for initiation, not interment? A place where the priest kings of Egypt underwent transformation, physical, spiritual, or something else? The Greeks believed Egyptian mysteries could alter the soul. That initiates came out changed, enlightened, reborn, terrified. The pyramid, in this view, is not a tomb. It's a device. A machine for turning humans into gods. And if that sounds wild, good. Because so does carving 2.3 million blocks of stone with Bronze Age tools, stacking them with sub-millimeter precision, aligning them to the stars, just to bury one man in an empty box. Let's be honest. The Great Pyramid is too big to be a grave. It's too empty to be a sanctuary. And it's too perfect to be just a monument. It wasn't designed to be understood. It was designed to work. We just forgot how. So maybe it's not a tomb. Maybe it's a key. And we've spent the last 4,500 years looking for the lock. The Pyramidion problem, the missing tips of Egypt. You've seen the shape your whole life. Triangle on top. Broad base rising to a point. The pyramid, the icon of immortality, divine order, architectural perfection. But here's the thing. That point, that tip, that gleaming final touch, it's missing. On almost all of them. Nearly every pyramid in Egypt, from the smallest step pile to the Great Pyramid itself, is blunt, as if something was stolen, shattered, or never placed at all. We call that missing piece a pyramidion. And its widespread absence is not just cosmetic. It's suspicious. How it goes is this. A pyramidion is the capstone, the finishing stone, usually shaped like a miniature pyramid itself, but polished, often gilded, sometimes inscribed, the literal and symbolic point of the structure. In theory, the pyramidion was the final block laid, sealing the monument and symbolizing the pharaoh's connection to the sun god Ra. The pyramid itself represented a stairway to heaven. The pyramidion, the spark of divinity at the top. They were described in ancient texts, depicted in reliefs, even ritualized. But here's the mystery. Of the over 80 pyramids built across ancient Egypt, almost none have their pyramidions. The Great Pyramid, gone. Khafre's, gone. Menkaur's, gone. The Bent Pyramid, missing. The Red Pyramid, missing. Saqqara, nope. Dashur, nah. Abu Rawash, don't even ask. In fact, only a handful of pyramidions have ever been found, and they weren't discovered on top of anything. They were found buried, broken, or sitting quietly in museums with minimal fanfare. Why? Scientists tried to explain it. The go-to explanation is erosion and theft. That pyramidions, being high up and highly visible, were easy targets for looters, iconoclasts, or just time itself. That makes sense for one, maybe a few. But all of them? Over 4,000 years, no one bothered to preserve even a single original capstone in place. It's not like Egypt forgot how to protect monuments. We've got tombs full of toenail clippings that survived 3,000 years. But not a single sacred capstone? That's not erosion. That's removal. They still can't explain it because there's no pattern. Some pyramidions have religious inscriptions, others are blank. Some are made from granite, others basalt, others white limestone. Some are small, others enormous. None are in situ. And the deeper you dig, the stranger it gets. Because many ancient Egyptian texts describe pyramidions as being metal-clad, often in electrum, a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver, polished to blinding brilliance. They weren't just symbols. They were conductive. And if you believe the fringe theories, buckle up. Because the pyramidion wasn't just a decorative hat. It was the core component of the pyramid as device hypothesis. Think about it. A giant limestone structure, stable, dense, geometrically aligned. A granite core, piezoelectric. Internal shafts aimed at celestial bodies. Underground chambers, potential water flows, acoustic properties. And at the top, a metal-capped point. Sounds a lot like a circuit, doesn't it? A machine. Or, more specifically, a transmitter. Some researchers believe the pyramidion functioned like the tip of an antenna, completing an energetic structure designed to interact with Earth's magnetic field, channel cosmic frequencies, or even generate power. And if that's true, then removing the pyramidion would have been critical. To disable it, to disarm it, to shut it off. And that could explain the total absence. Not random theft, but targeted deactivation. Still too far-fetched? Then ask this. If pyramidions were so sacred, so divine, why don't we find temples dedicated to them? Why are the few remaining examples never displayed prominently? Why does the tip of Egypt's most iconic symbol receive so little attention? Unless someone doesn't want us looking up. Because the point of a pyramid isn't just aesthetic. It's symbolic, spiritual, energetic. It represents completion. Which means all these missing pyramidions might be more than just absent stones. They might be unfinished sentences, monuments missing their meaning, devices missing their keys. And until we find out where they went, or why they were taken, we may never really understand what the pyramids were built to do. Because if something went missing from every summit, then maybe what's lost isn't just the tip. It's the point. The inverted pyramid myth, the monument beneath our feet. It starts with a whisper, an offhand line in a dusty chronicle, a fringe footnote in an obscure travelogue. There was a pyramid, turned into the earth. At first, you dismiss it. A metaphor, surely, a mistranslation. A poetic way to describe a burial shaft or an underground tomb. But then it appears again. And again. Different sources, centuries apart, all hinting at a pyramid not built upward, but down. A monument not raised to the gods, but sunk into the earth like a geometric scar. A negative space. A void of deliberate symmetry. An inverted pyramid. How it goes is this. The myth suggests that somewhere beneath Egypt, perhaps under Giza, perhaps in Saqqara, perhaps somewhere lost to shifting sands, there exists a pyramid carved entirely below the surface. Not made of blocks, but cut into bedrock. A descending structure, mirror-shaped to its above-ground siblings. Level upon level, all angles preserved but invisible from the sky. A pyramid you don't look up at. A pyramid you fall into. Some say it was built as an antithesis to the Great Pyramid, a structure of negation, a spiritual inverse. Others claim it was a ritual tomb for something too dangerous, or too sacred, to be buried in plain sight. And then, there are the stories that the Egyptians didn't build it at all. That they found it, copied it, and then did everything they could to cover it up. Scientists tried to explain it. Most scholars deny the inverted pyramid outright. There's no archaeological record, no cartouche, no diagram in any known tomb or scroll. But here's where things get weird. At Saqqara, the step pyramid of Djoser is built above a massive shaft nearly 100 feet deep, with interconnected tunnels and side chambers beneath it. Many believe these were storage galleries. But others note the suspicious geometry of the underground plan corridors descending in straight lines, sharp angles, deliberate symmetry. Even older structures, like the Osirian at Abydos, are set well below ground level with massive granite blocks, water-filled chambers, and no clear construction origin. And then there are the unexplained voids beneath Giza, detected via seismic and radar scans that suggest large, unexplored underground structures with right-angled edges and symmetrical depth. Could these be remnants? Or entrances? They still can't explain it because the idea of inversion doesn't fit the Egyptian architectural model. But myth? Myth loves inversion. In ancient Egyptian cosmology, the world was born from none, the watery abyss beneath everything. The gods rose from this void. Creation came from below, not above. And some texts suggest that the dead didn't just rise to the stars, they descended into the earth, through mirrored worlds, through drought, the Egyptian underworld. What better way to honor that journey than with a structure that mirrors the pyramid in reverse? An initiation chamber, perhaps. A labyrinth. A prison. Or worse, a gate. Because if pyramids above ground were tombs for kings, maybe a pyramid underground was built for something no one wanted to return. Some researchers often ignored, of course, believe that early Egypt inherited its sacred geometry from an earlier civilization. That the very idea of the pyramid came from something they found, buried, immense, and not theirs. An inverted structure, shaped like a keyhole. Powerful. Ancient. Built not to celebrate death but to contain it. And if that's true, then maybe all the pyramids we see are decoys. Echoes. Imitations of the one beneath. Because if you wanted to hide something in plain sight, what better distraction than dozens of monuments above ground, each one claiming to be the real one? And what if the real pyramid, the first, the oldest, the inverted one, still hums below our feet? Cut deep. Flooded with sand. Sealed by silence. Waiting. The forgotten symbol, the ankh that vanished. You've seen it. A cross with a loop at the top. Held by gods, clutched by pharaohs. Etched onto tombs, temple walls, and amulets by the millions. The ankh, Egypt's key of life. A symbol so central to their spiritual language, it appeared in every period, every dynasty, every depiction of divine power. Until, one day, it stopped. Not gradually. Not replaced. Just gone. The ankh, the ultimate symbol of eternity, vanished from Egypt's visual vocabulary. And no one really knows why. How it goes is this. The ankh wasn't just decorative. It was functional. Gods held it outstretched, pressing it to the lips of kings to breathe life into them. It adorned coffins, promising rebirth. It hung in temples. It was worn in ceremonies. It was everywhere, from sun gods to funerary rites, from magic texts to kitchen knives. The shape was deliberate. The loop represented the eternal, the soul, the womb. The crossbar symbolized the horizon, the meeting of earth and sky. The vertical stem, the path between the worlds. Put together, the ankh wasn't just a symbol, it was a map. Of life, of death, of returning. And for thousands of years, it persisted unchanged. Until the late dynasties. Until Rome. Until Christianity. And then silence. The ankh was abandoned. No more carved hands offering it. No more art placing it at the mouths of the dead. Even in Coptic Christianity, where the crux ansata, a cross with a loop, briefly appears, it's stripped of its original meaning. Just decoration. Just heritage. Not power. Scientists tried to explain it. The typical answer: religious transition. As Christianity spread through Egypt, older symbols were demonized or deactivated. Temples were shut down, priests were disbanded, icons were defaced. The old gods were too pagan, too potent, too politically inconvenient. So the ankh, like Horus, Osiris, and Thoth, was tossed into the junk drawer of cultural memory. But here's the problem. The ankh didn't just stop being used. It stopped being copied. There are no crude versions in later folk art. No underground appearances in Coptic tombs. No transformation into Christian metaphor. It wasn't absorbed. It was cut off. And that suggests intent. They still can't explain it because, if the ankh was just a symbol, why was it treated like a threat? Other motifs survived. The eye of Horus became protective jewelry. Scarab beetles were repurposed as good luck charms. Even hieroglyphs persisted in certain talismans. But the ankh, the symbol of life, was treated like a locked door. Which leads to a very different theory. What if the ankh wasn't just a symbol of life, but a technology of it? Some esoteric researchers believe the ankh was not just a spiritual tool, but a functional object. A kind of tuning fork. A vibrational key. An object used in rituals to alter consciousness, restore balance, or even transmit energy. There are depictions of ankhs being used in ritual healing, astral journeys, and resurrection rites. It appears again and again in the hands of God standing before gates as if the ankh was needed to open something. And if that's true, then what happens when the wrong hands get hold of it? Maybe the ankh was buried because it wasn't safe anymore. Maybe it was encoded into stone so that only those with the right initiation could unlock its real meaning. Or maybe the ankh wasn't just a key. Maybe it was a lock, a safeguard, a glyph of balance holding back something Egypt was always trying to manage: chaos, death, or something older. So when the priests fell, when the temples collapsed, when the rituals ended, the ankh wasn't passed down. It was sealed. And we copied the shape, but lost the function. We wear it, tattoo it, mass-produce it in gold and plastic. But we don't know what it does. Because symbols aren't just pictures, they're systems, and when you break the system, you lose the power, and maybe that's what happened to the ankh. Not destroyed, not erased, just shut down, waiting. The pyramid that floated, Egypt's vanished tomb on the water. Not all pyramids touch the earth. At least, not according to the Greeks. In one of the strangest accounts of Egypt ever recorded, ancient historian Strabo describes a floating tomb, a structure that defied gravity, architecture, and common sense. He wasn't being metaphorical. He wasn't dreaming. He was describing a pyramid on a lake that seemed to hover above the surface. And then, as mysteriously as it appeared, it vanished from history. No ruins. No blueprints. No carvings. Just a description and a question. What was the tomb that floated? How it goes is this. Strabo's account takes us to Lake Moeris, an enormous, partially man-made lake in Egypt's Fayum oasis. He wrote that within this lake stood 2 pyramids, or perhaps just the tops of 2 pyramids, their bases submerged beneath the water. He claimed that during certain times of year, only the tips were visible, the rest lay beneath the surface, like sleeping titans. But even more bizarrely, he stated that the central tomb structure appeared to float, drifting slightly, shimmering at the surface. Other writers, like Pliny the Elder, Diodorus Siculus, and Herodotus, also reference strange buildings near or in the lake: temples, tombs, altars to gods of water and rebirth. Some said these were symbolic islands, artificial constructs meant to represent the afterlife. But a floating pyramid? That's something else. Scientists tried to explain it. Modern Egyptologists assumed the stories were exaggerated. Maybe the pyramids were just hilltops, misidentified by travelers unfamiliar with Egyptian terrain. Or maybe they were real pyramids built near the lake whose flooding made them appear partially submerged. But here's the strange part. No such pyramids have ever been found. Lake Moeris, now known as Birket Karun, has been surveyed extensively. No pyramid foundations, no submerged ruins. No trace of anything Strabo described. And that's what makes the story feel less like an exaggeration, and more like a deliberate redaction. They still can't explain it because Lake Moeris is not just a lake. It's a hydraulic marvel, partially artificial, fed by a network of ancient canals and basins, designed with staggering precision. The lake functioned as a reservoir, a flood control system, and possibly something else. It was sacred to Sobek, the crocodile god, a deity of water, chaos, protection. It was the site of mysterious temples, like the Labyrinth of Hawara. And its water levels were manipulated by ancient engineers whose methods we still haven't fully decoded. So what if the lake itself was a ritual machine? A mirror, a lens, a veil. And what if, during certain times of year, equinoxes, solstices, celestial alignments, something appeared in that mirror? Maybe not a literal floating pyramid, but a reflection. A shimmer of stone that wasn't there before. An architectural mirage? A stargate? A structure meant to exist only under specific conditions? Or maybe the stories were true. Maybe there was a tomb built on water, its foundations made not of limestone, but of intention. A structure so holy it couldn't be touched by the ground. So sacred, it had to float. Some legends say the tomb belonged to a priest king, a divine architect who held the secrets of both earth and sky. Others claim it was an initiation platform where the highest adepts crossed from life to death and back again, without ever sinking. And if that sounds impossible, consider this. The Egyptians built boats for the dead, solar barks, funerary ships. They buried entire fleets beside their pyramids. To them, the soul traveled by water. So maybe the floating pyramid wasn't a metaphor. Maybe it was a ferry for the spirit, for the gods, for the impossible. And if it vanished, it wasn't because it was destroyed, it was because it was never meant to stay. It appeared, it functioned, and then, like a ritual complete, it returned to the water, leaving behind only whispers, only the glint of memory, only the feeling that something just beyond reflection once touched the edge of reality, and then let go.